I think it's usually from infections and blood clots, but not a blood.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is 1:02 p.m. on Tuesday, February 23rd, and this is school board briefing meeting. Before we get started with the first presentation, I see the gentleman already up there ready to go. Thank you. I just wanted to mention that as you came into the district today, you may have noticed that our flags are flying at half staff. And I thought that it was important to mention that this is per President Biden, and it's a sad commemoration or memorial for the 500,000 people that we have lost with COVID-19. And I know all of us are hoping and praying that with vaccinations and all of us wearing our masks and continuing with the social distancing, and I know our schools, the whole district has been doing a phenomenal job of educating about wearing the masks and tracing and all of those things. But that flag reminds us that it's, in this past year, it's been a long, hard year for all of us. Okay, changing gears. First presentation, executive services. This is a disparity study update, and Attorney Brian Williams, he's the chief staff attorney, and Attorney James Holloway, staff attorney, will be our presenters. So welcome.
All right, and to begin, I just kind of want to highlight that in addition to giving this disparity study update, it's going to be pretty comprehensive. And the reason we did it that way is we wanted to give you as much information about the process of doing a disparity study, as well as some historical background on it, because I know we uploaded a lot of materials that were in along with this presentation. But again, we just want to make our board as aware of as much information as they can, so that as we embark on this process, that we answer some of those questions ahead of time. And so, you know, I don't want you to, again, there's a lot of information in here, and I think we can follow this up with additional conversations or workshops if that's necessary. That being said, let's talk about our objectives today, which is what is a disparity study, history of MWB programs, key legal cases, race and gender neutral programs, small business programs, disparity study components, framework of a study, and disparity study process timelines, as well as our recommendations, and of course, last but not least, questions. At this point, I am going to turn the presentation over to James Holloway. However, I am going to define for you what a disparity study is. A study in conformance with strict constitutional scrutiny that reviews and analyzes the utilization and availability of minority women-owned business enterprises in a particular market area to determine if disparity exists in the awarding of contracts to MWBs by a public agency, and to evaluate whether the use of race-conscious measures would be supported by the analysis.
Good morning. Again, James Holloway.
Excuse me, can you guys get a little closer to the microphone, please?
Yes, ma'am. My microphone wasn't on,
I
so.
shouldn't have referred to you as you guys. Could you find Ben, please?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
All right. So I'm going to go through the history of minority and women business enterprises. And the important part as you go through this, this historical journey that may not be the most exciting is to understand that the historical journey dictates the why as it relates to a disparity study. So there's a lot of controversy as it relates to disparity studies in terms of their expense and complexity that you really won't get unless you have the historical context. So government contracting programs targeting the use of small businesses can be traced all the way back to 1932, where the purpose was to find solutions to the financial crisis caused by the stock market crash in 1929, which led to the Great Depression. So during World War II, government agencies were created to help small businesses compete for those wartime contracts. Now, the struggle for civil rights in 1960 then led to the birth of affirmative action programs in government contracting. Importantly, throughout the course of this presentation, we're going to refer to affirmative action programs, race-based programs, and race-conscious programs interchangeably. Now, those terms imply a government-initiated program that specifically includes racial or ethnic preferences in alleviating discriminatory behavior. Very important. Anytime you want to do something and you're the government and it's based on someone's race, you better get it right. Okay? So, then the Public Works Employment Act of 1977 established set-asides of 10% for all procurement dollars for minority-owned businesses. Of course, the perception is that government programs that set aside contract award dollars for certain groups necessarily cause government contract award dollars. It causes government contract award dollars to be taken away from certain groups. Therein lies the impetus for challenges to these programs. So, challenges to the programs then establishes what you need to do in order to successfully be able to initiate and run these programs. Hence, the historical journey as it relates to those challenges. This funny chart, which you probably do not understand, but I want to give you something to look at aside from quotes, is basically a map starting with what I believe to be the most significant seminal case, which is City of Richmond versus J.A. Cross and Company, all the way through relatively recent case law related to this area. And again, it's impossible to get through all the nuance that you have to navigate through without knowing how courts actually evaluated factual circumstances and ruled on those specific factual issues. Now, the Supreme Court first examined the constitutionality of a non-federal minority preference program, in this case, the Croson case, which is the seminal case. In that case, the city of Richmond enacted a minority business utilization plan that required prime contractors, meaning that's the big contract that then gets broken down potentially into subparts. They had to have at least 30% minority participation in the subcontracts. So the city issued an invitation to bid on the project for plumbing work at a city jail. All right, and then Mr. Croson, who was a white plumber, made several good faith attempts to subcontract out at least 30% of the job. In actuality, it was more like 75% of the job because he wanted to get the fixtures that he was going to use to fix the city jail from a minority business. So Mr. Croson doesn't just pay it lip service. He actually gets a list from the city of Richmond. He starts calling minority contractors. Nobody's interested. Can't find anyone. Last day, the bid needs to be submitted. As we know, if you don't submit the bid on time, you're non-responsive, you don't get the job. The date of the submittal, he finds a minority business. They quote him something that's way above what he budgeted. So he submits his bid without a minority business. He doesn't meet the 30% threshold for subcontracts. They then realize he was the only one who bid on this job. Instead of giving him the job without the minority set-aside being implemented, they deemed his bid non-responsive. So they still wouldn't give him the contract. They wanted to go and rebid it. So naturally, he sues. Now, this is the most significant case in this area of law because it's really the first time we see somebody going through the actual evidentiary process, evaluation of that evidence, and then spitting out an analysis. Most importantly, this established the standard by which these programs would be evaluated, which is strict scrutiny. So under strict scrutiny, a race-conscious governmental procurement program, and it's not just limited to that, any race-conscious governmental program has to adhere to the strict scrutiny standard, which is the highest standard in law. So there had to be basically the program has to be justified by compelling governmental interest, which alleviating past racial discrimination is a compelling governmental interest. but there's a lot of nuance associated with that we'll walk through. The second thing is, if you have a race-conscious program, it has to be narrowly tailored to the governmental interest that you're trying to move forward or alleviate or adhere to. So having a very small problem and a very large solution won't cut it. The solution needs to fit tight to the actual problem that you're trying to resolve. Now, satisfying this standard requires what they term, and this quote comes up in all the cases, a firm evidentiary basis for concluding that the underutilization of minorities is a product of past discrimination. I just want to go back and put a pin in that term, firm evidentiary basis, right? Because some evidence is open to interpretation. At what point do you cross the threshold? Then you have to understand that the term underutilization is also a term of art. How do you calculate underutilization?
Underutilization?
Underutilization. And then you're also, another term that's included in what I was just discussing, is that you're trying to remedy past discrimination. Well, as we know from any cursory review of American history, how far back do you go when you're dealing with past discrimination? Whose past discriminations can you remedy by way of imposition of some burden on another individual that didn't actually play a role in that discrimination? So all these things you have to start to consider as you're going through the analysis. Now, one of the important things about this case is that none of the evidence presented by the city pointed to any identified discrimination that the city of Richmond actually perpetuated. As a result, it was almost impossible to determine whether the plan was narrowly tailored to remedy the prior discrimination since it was not linked to any identified discrimination in any way. The court noted that it would have helped if the city of Richmond had showed that they attempted race-neutral means to increase minority participation prior to implementing the race-conscious program. This highlights the all-important question. If the problem is race-neutral, why would it necessitate a race-conscious solution?
I just want to add something because I think that's a really good point to stop and kind of focus on. We're dealing with a very interesting county here in Lee County. We have a lot of different contractors, but it's not a South Florida type of situation. In Miami, we had plenty of contractors and plenty of subcontractors in a lot of different areas, including plumbing, electrical, acoustical ceiling. Here, we don't have that, right? We don't have as many of a variety in those areas. In some cases, we're limited to maybe one or two vendors in a particular trade. And so that becomes substantial when you make these analysis, because you have to look at your market, your availability, versus that of another county, for example. So what would be designed for Miami-Dade would not be designed for Lee County, and that goes back to his point about having a very narrowly tailored program. And so that's how we get here, and that's kind of what we're going for when we say narrowly tailored. Sorry.
So this quote comes from the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a federal court that incorporates Fort Myers and Lee County. And they're applying the standard that came from the case Croson that we just talked about. This is a different case. It's Ainsley Branch NAACP versus Siebels. But this quote is very telling because it talks about some of those terms of art that we just discussed. A strong basis in evidence cannot rest on an amorphous claim of societal discrimination. Remember, we all know racism and all kinds of atrocities have existed in the name of racism, but a governmental program that gives a percentage of business to any particular geographical area may not be the most tailored fit in terms of remedying that past discrimination. The courts look at that. And even legislative assurances of good intention. You all are the legislators of this particular entity. You all make the laws, right? So if you all say we want to cure a past wrong, and that generic statement is truly the sentiment that you're trying to accomplish, it might not cut it legally. Even congressional findings of discrimination in the national economy isn't enough. That's very important because we have a Florida statute that talks about minority business enterprises. We'll get to that in just a moment. as a juxtaposition, where there is significant statistical disparity between the number of qualified minority contractors. Significant statistical disparity is important because now you're talking math, right? Now you're taking something that is a concept that we can all perceive, and you're putting it into, I call it the flex capacitor. I don't know if you all are Back to the Future fans, right? But you have to take racism and put it into the flex capacitor and spit out a number of racism. Oh, what an easy task, right? So then you have to determine that based on the number of contractors that are ready, willing, and able to perform jobs for this district. So what if the discrimination is such that anybody who came here that was talented, minority, and ready to do a great job said, forget this, I am gone. They're not available to do jobs for us, right? Then you get into the nightmare of trying to actually quantify where those ready, willing, and available contractors are, and you need to memorialize and keep that data in a way that's ready to be pulled out at a moment's notice and analyzed by some consultant in order to get your program. So as you can see, there are a number of logistical and practical hurdles in order to get there. Now, this actually demonstrates the need for a disparity study because there are experts that focus on getting into the data and being able to spit out that formulaic analysis that can get you where you need to go. So this case is vital because it talks about 15 years after Croson, whenever the Florida Associate General Contractors Incorporation challenged the constitutionality of the actual Florida statute that authorizes minority business enterprise programs. So in that statute, the Florida legislature determined that there existed evidence of, quote, a systemic pattern of past and continuing racial discrimination against minority businesses, and a disparity in the availability and use of minority firms. So you have Florida legislators that are basically saying, yeah, racism exists, it's real, and it keeps businesses away. So we want to enact a statute, a duly enacted legislation that, for all intents and purposes, should be lawful. At the federal level, it's still subject, at the state level, it's still subject to federal regulation. So our state legislators may feel one way, but federal courts don't necessarily agree. And that's why we have a statute today on the books that we can't actually utilize to its full extent because of this particular lawsuit. So what ended up happening is the district court granted summary judgment in favor of the AGC. And as a result of the settlement, the Florida legislature decided that it would agree to not enforce its minority business enterprise program for 99 years. This case happened in 2004. I recently read some attorney general opinions that talked about the confusion because the state of Florida never repealed the statute. The state of Florida does certify small businesses. They may actually even certify minority businesses, but there's no preference program.
And I think the statute that he's referencing, and you may sometimes get this in emails from constituents, is the Competitive Consultants Negotiation Act, and that's CCNA. That's usually related to construction projects. It's applicable to both professionals, architects and engineers, as well as general contractors. And in that statute, it says one of the components that you're supposed to evaluate in your proposals is minority women business enterprise participation. And what he's saying is, because federal law requires that you do all of these things before you use that, you have to do all of those things before you use that. A lot of people think, well, it's in the statute, you have to do it. Well, there's a little bit more that has to be done before that, and I think it's, a lot of people are conflicted in understanding what that really means. So yes, there is a statute that says you are supposed to take that into consideration, but there is also federal law that says before you take that into consideration, you have to do one of these studies.
And I made sure, as we were working on this presentation, I saw that it was incredibly dense, and I was using a lot of, scientific and very technical terms, and I figured it would put you to sleep. But I argued with Mr. Williams, and I said we absolutely must include that piece about Florida statute, because without doubt, someone will come up here and they will stand at one of these microphones and they will say, well, why aren't you doing this, board members? There's a Florida statute that says you can. So now you have been equipped with a response, an appropriate response as it relates to the law. You're welcome. So case law related to these programs, it demonstrates that strict scrutiny is a really high bar, right? And it can seem daunting as we sit here and talk about it. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to reassure you that because there's been such contentious and detailed litigation about it, we pretty much have, through various cases, a template of what we need to do. It's not easy, it's not cheap, and you really have to show a commitment from a leadership level in order to get it done. But we know how to do it. Fortunately, you have in-house counsel that has the expertise and the grit and the motivation to actually get it done. Now, you will have to hire an outside consultant, but as we'll talk about throughout the course of this presentation, we can implement some things now that might help make that final push in order to get it done a lot easier and a lot less expensive by implementing some things right now.
And James, I'm going to add one thing because I think it's important to share with you, and it wasn't part of our presentation, but in listening to some of the conversation now, I wanted to highlight, because there is individual liability that can be placed on the board members as it relates to these programs, and that's why we're going through this legal analysis. And that actually happened in Miami, ironically, and what the court actually held, it held the county commissioners liable, but what it didn't fine them. I think it gave them some small monetary fine, but it was to prove a point that in making these decisions, in light of the law that is available to you, you can potentially be liable if you make a decision up here that impacts this and violates federal law. And that's why we are very particular about providing this information, because we want to make sure that every decision that is made with respect to this district is in full compliance with that law.
So as we talk about race-conscious programs, it's important that we take a step back and we consider what we can do with race and gender-neutral programs, right? Because again, if you can resolve a lot of the issues that we face by educating those that are seeking to do business with the district, if we can implement a program that essentially doesn't consider race, that actually alleviates a lot of our concerns, then not only is it a good idea to do that, but it's legally required that you do that, because you don't get to the place where a race-conscious program is necessary until you've tried race-neutral options. And that's the current trend now, small business programs. Importantly, in light of the cases that I spoke about as it relates to race-conscious programs, there's a case out there where somebody actually challenged a race-neutral program, a small business program. And essentially what the court said was the most forgiving and easiest to accomplish constitutionality standard of review, which is basically a rational basis test. What you're doing makes sense. That's the standard of review that you apply when you're dealing with a race or gender neutral program. So you'll see in our recommendations that we've had conversations with staff, and we want to start heading in that direction as soon as we can in order to facilitate whatever we can do in terms of relief for this problem by way of a race-neutral program.
And to add to that, a race-neutral program obviously doesn't take race or gender into consideration. It's simply based on economics. So if you're a small business, you're a small business. You could be white, black, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. And I think we have a variety of businesses here locally that we want to help, and they're small businesses. And I think that's important because, one, you don't have to do a disparity study to have a small business program. You do for a MWB program and a race-conscious program. The other thing is a small business program and the rational basis test can be applied to other areas such as veterans. So the state has a veterans program. In Miami-Dade County, we created a service-disabled veterans program, which ultimately became a veterans program. Having one of the largest school ROTC programs in the United States, I think, we obviously care about our veterans. I know we have a veteran as a superintendent. Both my parents are veterans. And so I think that's one of the things you'll see when we get to our recommendations, is that having a small business program doesn't take race into consideration, can be effective, allows you to include other groups in addition to race and gender, and achieves some of the same goals that you would try to accomplish with an MWB program And last but not least, legally you should do that before you get to the MWB program. So it's something you can implement almost immediately. It's something that actually goes to cure the issue, doesn't take race into consideration, so you get participation from all levels. And ultimately, if it's designed appropriately, and I advocate for this, if you design it appropriately, it can work. There's a lot of criticisms about it, but I believe that a lot of the programs that are criticized weren't designed appropriately. They weren't tailored to fit your market or your demographic. They didn't consider monetary thresholds. They didn't look at census data when they developed them. That's important because you fully have to understand your market when you're designing these programs to get the best impact overall. And so, again, I think they're highly effective programs. I advocate for small business programs. I can tell you that Miami, when we implemented our small business program and we did our second disparity study, it said our small business program was effective, that we didn't necessarily need to do a minority women business enterprise program. They did come back with one, but again, that I think there were some political pressures there. But again, the small business program was working, and you saw the distribution of work going to various groups. At this point in the presentation, I just wanted to kind of go through what the disparity study components are, so you understand when that consultant, if they're retained, these are the areas they're going to look at, and these are the areas that they're going to describe in those reports. We'll also get you a disparity study complete report. I was looking at several that are out there. Actually, Miami-Dade's actually finishing one that hasn't been published yet, which I kind of know what's in it, but Palm Beach is considering one. There's several other districts that have recently done one, but I wanted to get one more recent so you could see if there were any changes in the law. The components are review of relevant laws, policies, and procedures, and that includes our district's procedures. So they'll come in and look at our district's procedures and see how some of our procurement processes, whether that be at the district level in terms of our buyers and purchasing department, or even at the school site level, where you have bookkeepers or principals making, discretionary spending at that level. It looks at it overall and determines whether there are issues with your process that could be improved. Determining your geographic and product market area. This is typically considered 70 to 80% of where you do business. So where do your 70 to 80% of your contracts come from? Typically in an area like this, it's usually a tri-county, so it may be, or a geographic region. In Miami-Dade, it's Miami, usually their tri-market areas, Miami, Broward, and Palm Beach is where the majority of their vendors come from. That's mostly on the construction side. I would think most of our contractors come here locally, like a Suffolk or, one of the other general contractors that we use. But then when you go onto the procurement side, it's usually more at a national level. And typically your procurement area is, if you get paper from wherever, or because that procurement purchasing side usually involves like things like insurance or very large ticket items that are more national organizations, your market area is usually determined at that level for purchasing of goods and services. The utilization analysis is that's going to be an analysis of who are you using. They're going to look directly at what vendors are you using from that geographic market area versus what vendors are available, and that's where you get to the availability analysis. We talked about this a little bit earlier with the availability analysis. Just because someone, I debate this issue in terms of looking at disparity studies. Just because someone's available doesn't mean they're able to bid on your work. There are certain requirements, and again, the vendor community doesn't always understand this. In some cases, you must be licensed. In some cases, you must be pre-qualified or have a certain bond to actually even bid on work. So if you don't have the license and you don't have the bond, you're not technically ready, willing, and able, because you're not ready because you don't have the necessary legal requirements to actually perform that function. So we may have 30 contractors out there that say they're ready to do the work, but they either don't have the bonding capacity or they don't have the license, and therefore they're not technically able to do the work. So they try to drill down to see exactly who's actually available to perform that work, because these numbers matter when they determine what that percentage of participation really should be.
And I was, at this point, supposed to turn the presentation over to Mr. Williams, but I kind of wanted to jump back in because I thought these areas, availability, utilization, and the disparity calculation, were some of the most interesting to me. So in reviewing this and having several conversations with staff, we were essentially talking about our data collection and record-keeping methodology, and we really wanted to make sure that whenever the consultant came a-knocking, we had everything they needed in order to look at who was out there and who we were using. And so that was a very interesting part of kind of the conception of what we could do here, because it's historically a problem whenever you go into a large organization, because different departments have different records that are kept in different ways. So pulling that out, dusting it off, and putting the numbers together isn't always apples to apples, right? We might have, some purchasing policies that may not necessarily be consistent with what we're doing over in construction. The other thing I thought was interesting was actually, again, putting these things into a calculation, because we're talking about real contract award dollars and the actual effect that that has on neighborhoods, on essentially school children and different areas within a county or a geographic region. So whenever you actually look at the utilization analysis, it becomes telling, I think, and a lot of different things that may be systemic that we might not be able to get at, but things that we should be aware of. I mean, I'm a firm believer that you can preach education all day long to kids, but until you see it translate into real money and a good living, nobody cares. And so what you see by way of the utilization and the disparity calculation is who's actually getting money from large organizations that have contracts to award. And regardless, we want to know that, whether or not it results in a minority business enterprise program.
And part of what a consultant will go back and do for the utilization analysis is they'll go back and try to figure out who actually did the work, right? So we had cases in the study I did in Miami where we actually had minority-owned firms that did the work, but because they had not gone through the certification process, when we ran the numbers in our system, it came up as a non-minority participation. And so when you look at these things, these are things you have to fix internally so that your numbers are correct, right? Because there's going to be flaws in the data. If your data isn't correct, what you put into the system is what comes out of it, right? So if you put bad data in, the data that comes out is flawed. And ultimately, when someone goes to criticize the study, they're going to look at things like that. And that's why it's very important when you go through these studies that beforehand you kind of do an overall review of what you have, so that you're prepared to actually provide the accurate information for that consultant to actually process. Because again, there's a lot that goes into those studies, and I find that the data portion is the most expensive part, and the more work they have to do, the longer it's going to take, and the more they're going to charge you. So, with respect to that, on that, one of the last few components is the private sector analysis. In order for them to do a comparison, they do a comparison to the private sector. There's a significant amount of work that can be done in the private sector. There's a lot of money, and they look to see if there's trends in the private sector versus the public sector, and how the private sector work may impact the public sector. Anecdotal data collection and community engagement. A consultant they're going to do actual public forums. So they're going to go out into the community. They're going to do surveys, public forums. They're going to engage the community. They're going to talk to our vendors. We won't know who they are. And they're going to find out what the vendors think about doing business with us, and get actual, real life comments from, our stakeholders. One of the things I think that is interesting about that is, and legally, you can't rely on that anecdotal data alone. That's why you have to do all those analysis that came beforehand. A lot of people think, well, all the vendors say this must be true, and that is a component of it, and I think it's certainly something an organization needs to know from the vendor community, but that alone legally isn't enough to say there's disparity within a community. And then final reports and recommendations. And so those are the basic components of a study. The next slide is a framework of a disparity study, and this typically collects the relevant data. And here are the various categories that they typically look at. It's your construction and construction-related specialty trades, including plumbing, electrical, HVAC. You've got your professional services, architectural engineering. You've got your professional services that are non-architectural and engineering, non-professional services, and goods. This includes maintenance and goods and services and all those various areas where we do business with the community. In terms of the study process and timelines, the data collection, that says 3 to 5 years. That doesn't mean it's going to take 3 to 5 years. That means that they look at a period of time of 3 to 5 years of what you've done in terms of contracting. I will tell you, legally sufficient is 3, right? Obviously, the more they do, the more expensive your study, because that's more data they're looking at. I would say that when you want to go up to a period of 5 years, it's when you have an unusual trend in your doing business. We might be in that right now because obviously COVID affected our ability to do business. So there may have been a drop in business in certain services because of COVID. I would say when the construction market dropped over, nationally, the economy was down, purchasing wasn't up. So that would have been an anomaly in terms of analyzing that particular year of data. The key is to get the best data that's consistent with what actually is happening, so that you don't have, so that when the analysis comes out and it says that you have disparity in certain areas, it's actually reflective of what's going on. The data evaluation does typically take anywhere for a year to 2 years. These studies aren't done in 6 months, and be perfectly honest. In some cases, they've taken 3 years or even more than that. I think that's dependent on the form in which you have your data, and then as well as the the effort by both the organization and the consultant. A solicitation for a disparity study typically takes 2 to 3 months. There's a 2 handful of consultants out there that does this nationally. I'm going to give you a list of it towards the end of the presentation. They've done most of the studies in Florida. I'd say 3 firms have done most of the studies in the state of Florida. There are some that have done a lot more that have done nationally. Some of these firms are regional. Usually these things can be solicited because they all follow this, and they will bid, or I would recommend that our procurement department sends them out, at least sends the solicitation to these various firms so that they're aware. The evaluation of the RFQs, RFPs by staff usually takes 1 to 2 months because, again, you're going through and looking at credentials in terms of what they've done and setting up selection committees. And then school board approval typically takes 1 to 2 months after that. In terms of our recommendations and considerations at this point, sorry, I got 2 slides in front of me. And I'll kind of split this up with James. There are a lot of things we can do. I typically recommend the things that are the cheapest because we're obviously being fiscally conservative these days. And I think there's things we can do where there's little to no monetary cost. It's just a question of us, working on the framework of what we as an organization want to do. And so a lot of the recommendations and considerations that we would suggest at this time really involve policymaking, because you start at that. I think you have to start at the policy level to kind of set the tone for the framework for what we intend to do as an organization. And so I think we made a large step in the board approving our non-discrimination policy. I think at this time we're going to recommend a commercial non-discrimination policy that's specifically rated to how we do business. And that's where a lot of the policies that we're going to suggest, and obviously this would involve working with the board attorney, as well as staff, as well as you, as well as members of the community, because I think in order to do these things, you got to get input kind of from an all-around view, because there will always be perspectives that I think we'll need to take into consideration as we develop these things. The other recommendation is to adopt a diversity in business practice policy, and that says how do we as an organization reflect that we're going to be doing these things in our procurement process. We did this in Dade, and it was a very interesting process when we got down to it, because it involved working with our purchasing department and finding out who was actually making our purchases, right? At the school site level, finding out that it was, sometimes the bookkeeper or sometimes, the principal, and educating them about the importance of taking diversity into consideration as they purchase. Trying to buy locally, versus if you can get it locally versus buying it on Amazon from California, the option is to go with our local vendor, who again is one of our taxpayers, and also children might go to our school system. So that's one thing to take into consideration. Also, I think in our policy we required that all of our procurement staff or those in the purchasing process go through a diversity training. So we actually designed a diversity training specifically related to the purchasing process, so they understood why we were trying to do this, what that implication meant, And a lot of things came out of that. It was very interesting to see some of the views that take place, and it was a little unorthodox because typically you see diversity training in the human resource department in terms of diversity and inclusion, but this was with respect to having diverse and inclusion as it relates to our purchasing process.
So at this point, I'll jump in and I'll make a pathetic attempt at trying to provide a moment of levity. When I first started getting into trying to build the framework around this program, I was excited, right? Super enthusiastic, and I started building the most comprehensive and amazing program money can buy, right? And I was just harassing Dr. Desmores. I was going by Adam Malloy's office, and we were going to just do something that was much better than what they have in Miami-Dade. And then I realized that somebody actually has to do this work, and a lot of different school districts actually have different programs, and I'm talking 15, 16, 17, up to 20 employees in order to run this type of program. And I'm just trying to do it with existing staff on nights and weekends, just me, some Red Bull and policy review, and I'm just ready to take on the world. But I have since sobered, and I understand that we need to put realistic expectations. And as I'm working with the board attorney and working with staff, while I do think that we could do something amazing here, I think that we also have to be cognizant of, what resources we have. And we're coming off an extremely difficult time where everyone was stretched to the limit, and asking staff to do one additional thing, even if it's in furtherance of something great, is a lot right now. So whereas this is kind of like the most, I guess, intriguing thing that I feel like is on my desk, no offense, but reviewing contracts and, some of the stuff that I do with other departments, just it pales in comparison to me. I'm also conscious of what it will take to get to where we want to go, and I want to make you all aware of it, because I think this is something that, if you're looking at it, it could seem like the greatest thing that we could accomplish. It could be legitimately our legacy. This program can legitimately change this geographic area, and it could be this board's legacy. But with responsibility that comes with this is not necessarily going to be able to fall just on the board members, just on the attorneys. It's going to fall to staff. And so I just want to make everybody aware of that and conscious of it, and let you all know about my overzealous and super enthusiastic behavior as a young attorney.
What he's saying is I had to rein him in. It's basically, and he's correct, and I have to, I have to love the passion, right? Because I'm passionate about these types of programs as well, because I've been able to see the impact they've had on a community. I've literally been able to see a vendor who did $200,000 in contracts, have bonding up to $200,000, to, as of today, do $25 million projects, and then hire a bunch of people in the process. And so when you realize the economic impact, and I know the community is watching, our purpose is education. I get that, right? But when you're a billion-dollar organization and your economic footprint is X, there also becomes an obligation to how you use that and how that can effectively be used to benefit your community. And I think that's what the purpose of these programs are, is to use that economic footprint and keep it within this community so that our parents and their children see the benefits of having businesses here locally and can prosper. So,
And at a time, I think that with the pandemic, we have seen a transition even away from small and local businesses toward larger businesses that have the ability to use the infrastructure of Amazon and others to deliver things in the midst of all this. So our local community suffers. So if you have a program such as this, where the employees and the owners are, potentially parents of our students, I think that's a win-win for the school district and for the community at large. And
that's why we have on here to adopt a small business enterprise program. which would include MWB certification. We have to track this information to do an adequate disparity study. And it's transparent. It goes to what I think a lot of board members have pushed in terms of us being transparent about what we do. We're going to be tracking it. Reports can be generated to see exactly what we're doing. This is not going to be a secret. If we're not doing it, we're not doing it. And if, we need to know what we're not doing, right? And it needs to be documented in order for a report to be generated so we can legally go out and create a program to address it. And again, the thing I like about small business programs is that we can include things like veteran-owned businesses. I think that's something that's important to me. Continue to educate our firms about how to do business. That's something I think we're already doing, thanks to Dr. Desimore and her team. But we, just figuring out ways to make sure they know how to put in these bids. I mean, we've seen situations where people have not done it right and as a result not gotten work, and we just need to make sure. And I know a lot of people think the onus shouldn't be on the organization, the businesses. All of the businesses are at different points in their phases, and I think there is some obligation to, again, help them through the process to the extent possible. Revise our data collection and record keeping processes. Obviously, this is important. We need to look at all of our processes and make sure that there's a template of what you really need to be collecting. We have it. It's no big secret. We just need to make sure we're actually collecting it, right? And that includes subcontracting and subconsultant data, which oftentimes agencies don't keep because you're not in direct privity with the subconsultant or the subcontractor. That's between the general contractor and them. So a lot of that data isn't being kept. That includes looking at our contract language and including language that allows us access to that information or requires the contractor to produce it. So there's a lot of little processes that you can change to make sure you're getting the information that you need to get.
And I just want to jump in here and kind of give a shout out to Dr. Amy, because she's meeting with me, cramming these meetings with me in between her incredibly busy schedule, because she legitimately wants to see what's good for the people. And just an amazing person of the utmost integrity, and I have the greatest respect for her. And as a result of some of those conversations, we've already implemented certain things to revise our data collection and record keeping practices. There's still more that we can do, and it's a pretty involved process to keep what we need in order to really just have it ready and available for a consultant. But we've made some strides, and we will continue to make more strides. We are kind of brainstorming the way that we can do that in the most efficient and the best way, so that we make that part of it a lot easier. I also just wanted to say, I don't know where we are because I didn't time our conversation. I think we're getting pretty close, and we do have other slides, but this may be appropriate to give some of you who've been writing feverishly and keeping copious notes an opportunity to ask questions.
I was hoping you'd say that. Okay, so board members, what questions do you have? Ms. Skittins.
I put my pen down, Mr. Holloway. Okay.
It's smoking.
It's still smoking. I have a couple of questions. They should be really quick. One is, we talk about race-conscious programs, MWBEs, race and gender neutral. Is it possible to give us a cheat sheet that has each one of those and says just the basic, this is what they can and cannot do?
Yes, ma'am, we certainly can.
That would be very helpful to me. And then also, when all of this began with these types of programs, I was always concerned about the gender piece of it, and not being greedy, but I have seen where minority businesses have gotten pushed aside because of gender businesses. And that's an issue that maybe sometime you can address as well. I'll tell you each thing real quick. Our responsibility as a majority-minority district with all this, how does that all mesh together? Do we have a responsibility to reflect what we do with who we are and who our customers are? And you did mention that there are not a lot of minority businesses in our area. So when we look at the cost and time of putting this together? Not that we don't want to do it, but is there something that could save us money to not go the route of the, the full-fledged consultant because we are looking at a smaller group? And and the last thing is, there was on one of the slides that talked about RFQs and RFPs. So is this being done in connection with like planning that's putting together a process right now to deal with how we do that type of thing? And that's it. I'm done.
I'll start with that last question first. We are working with procurement to, there are several RFPs out there that kind of, spell out how you solicit these things. I've actually drafted one in the past myself. And so I think we're ready to go if that needs to occur. And again, it's dependent on what we really find. I can tell you that in looking at some of the data that we have, we're not there yet, right? We don't have the data in a format that would allow us to even go into that phase of the study. Oftentimes agencies do what's called a pre-disparity study, and it tells them you don't have it and you can't do it and you shouldn't start it. And I'll use Orange County. They did a 3-year multi-agency disparity study. I think it cost over $600,000, maybe like $800, and they had nothing came out of it. Zero. So they spent $600,000 and none of those agencies got a program. Same thing happened with Miami-Dade, the actual county. They did a 3.5-year study, spent $500,000, and then their county attorney said, we don't have our data in the proper format to actually have a legally defensible program. So, we don't want to be there, right? We don't want to spend money and then get to that point where we're told that. So I think in fairness, I have a lot of experience in this area, so I'm looking at what of our, I can almost do a pre-disparity study for you, and so we're in a situation where I can easily look and say we're not in a position where we would want to start that. But that being said, I agree that we should have all that stuff ready, right? So when we are there, it should take, press of the button, we've got the RFP ready to go. So, but ultimately, I think that's going to depend upon what information we have and determinations that are made internally in terms of how many years do we want to look at. Again, I think legally sufficient is 3 years. Sometimes it's more because of, again, whatever's going on in those economic fiscal years. And then, how much data are we looking at? Do we want to phase the study, meaning do we want to focus on construction and maintenance since that's a large area where we have vendor availability? Or do we want to do a global study, including purchasing and goods and services? So there's a lot of just little factors that have to be taken into consideration. Ultimately, the board will give us some direction in terms of where they want to go. In Miami, we did a phase 1 and a phase 2. We did construction first because we had a ton of money for construction, and it was all of our operations guys, they just want to go. And so we wanted to make sure that area was addressed as we were rolling the money out in construction. Go ahead.
Just so you know, this is our dynamic. I tell Brian I'm going to sit there and be quiet, and then I go into a meeting and I take it over, and I'm like pedal to the metal, super excited. But I did want to address the other questions because you talked about potentially avoiding the cost and the effort of going through the disparity study in order to get all this information. I don't think that we can outright avoid that, but I do think that we can limit the scope of it. For instance, we have certain areas where there's better methodology in terms of the record keeping just by their very nature. Like construction is something that's just inherently transparent at the prime contractor level. So the only thing we would need to do there is kind of tighten up our processes around keeping that subcontractor information, and that would probably be something that's more readily available to be studied, and then we can kind of expand out to other areas in goods and services. So that's one thing we could do. We could also, and I want this to be something that puts other agencies on notice. If you're not doing what you can in this area, county, city, everywhere in the surrounding area of local governments, go ahead, start collecting your data, join us, let's split the cost of this study. So that's out there in the atmosphere now, and I'm calling them out. The other thing, as it relates to the majority-minority district, it's important to remember that the disparity study calculates utilization in conjunction with availability. So the ratio, and I kind of, I'm a little bit of a nerd, and I was going through the statistics and just how they do it. So essentially, the availability, if you have, say, 1 out of 10 firms that's a minority, right? That's the availability, 10%. And if you have utilization of 1 out of 10 firms that are a minority, then the utilization and the availability are a 1-to-1 correlation. And if you're considering that data in a majority-minority district, the availability and the utilization should change based on your own demographics. So the study will basically spit out what you need to be doing in order to kind of defray or minimize the discriminatory impact, if there is a discriminatory impact on anyone, if that makes sense. So the data is what it is. It's just the analysis of the data, and it changes the conclusions based on what you have and how you're using it.
Right, well, thank you so much for that, and that's something very interesting to me, because if our majority of our district continues to grow to be minority, that means people are coming in that are business owners or want to be business owners, so somehow or another, we should be going side by side with that, but thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Patrica?
So, excellent, excellent hire, Attorney Williams, meaning your hire of Mr. Holloway. I can hear your passion and your deep understanding of this. It's really fun to listen to you. Plus, equal protection law is one of my favorites. Love, love, love to learn more about it. One of the questions I have here is, can we work with the county and/or Lee Health, not just to defray the cost, but to take on a more inclusive approach to include the whole county? I don't know that I would call them out as much as I would go to their equity and diversity committees and present this as an idea, and try to bring them in, as opposed to calling them out. I know that some of my colleagues on elected boards don't like to be called out, so
Understood.
that approach might go a little bit further. You mentioned that there could be some criticism out there that we are an education institution, and so why are we getting involved in this? The reality is that we are a transportation institution and a healthcare institution and a food service institution and a construction institution. So we can call ourselves an education institution, but what we do goes far, far, far beyond simply educating children. What are we looking at? Couple questions. You put some policies in there. At what point will we discuss those policies for potential adoption?
So I would work with the board attorney to make sure she's comfortable with anything that we propose. I have some ideas, but I didn't want to overstep and go into her purview, but we will remain available, and I think I would kind of defer to her in terms of whenever it's ready to be presented to you all, but I'll facilitate that conversation. I think we have a bi-weekly meeting that's coming up here pretty soon, so we'll broach that topic the next time we're in the room together.
All right, because I do have some concerns about some of the language in some of those policies, so I will bring that up at the appropriate time. Attorney Williams, you mentioned that it will take us time here before we can get to the point where we're even capable of engaging in a disparity study. How much time do you think that will take?
Honestly, without diving into our records, I think we have to examine that a little further. Just being candid, it's probably going to be 2 to 3 years away. I mean, I'm just being candid. But in that, our recommendation is to do a small business program, which again, legally you have to do before you even get to that race conscious program. So I don't want to say we're buying ourselves time, because I emphasize a small business program can work if designed appropriately, and you can tweak it along the way to make it, if it's not working, to make it work. And so you only bring the race conscious in when you, after a year of trying the race neutral program, you see that there are still pockets of areas where you're not making a significant impact, and then you go to that next level of the race conscious. So there's a process anyway, and I think it's not that you do nothing while you wait for the data to be collected. You put something in place and work towards achieving the same goal you would ultimately get with that program. So.
All right, and then when we are evaluating vendors for that potential study, one of the concerns that I have about one of our current vendors, and when you look at big vendors, when you have specialized vendors and there's only a few that do it, the cookie cutter reports that we get, it's cut and paste from other reports. I'd like you to take a close look at reports that have been produced by these companies and make sure that they are genuinely unique to the communities that they have studied so that we're getting a true product that reflects Lee County. I fear that sometimes we don't get that with the national companies.
No,
Those are my
absolutely.
comments for now. Thank you very much for this. This is interesting.
Mrs. Jordan?
Thank you. I just wanted to just piggyback on some of the things that Ms. Patrica had mentioned. We definitely have an impact on the economy here, for sure, and we all know that. And I guess my question would be too, the availability. You were saying that some of the smaller vendors or vendors may not have what is needed in order to qualify. Is there a list so that they know what they may need to get in order to qualify?
So that's, and again, we didn't get to all the presentation. I think there are things we can do internally to make sure they have that information, and that part of us sharing more and our procurement department, putting some things in place to share that information. And in terms of back to Board Member Patrica's comment about working with other agencies, I always advocate that because we're all talking to the same vendors. So why not have an event with Lee Health, the FGCU, and our school district where we get a bunch of vendors together and we all share information about exactly what you said. Another key component is sharing a list of forecast contracts. So saying we have these contracts that are set to expire, we will be advertising for them and forecast out a year. So all those firms know exactly what's coming out, what they will be bidding on. They can do public records requests and get copies of last year's bids and do the things necessary to meet those requirements. These are proactive things we can do to make sure those vendors get to the place that they need to be.
Thank you. And I do believe in the Horizon Council, and I think Dr. Atkins is part of that or was there. They are definitely trying to do the same thing as well. So I know Lee County is looking at, a lot of the same things that we are looking at and working with different vendors as well. And then my last thing, I totally forgot. Just recently, I've had quite a few people, small businesses in the area speak to me about how to get on the list of the vendors, which I was able to obtain that information and forward it to them so that they could proceed to do that. So I think just us being out there in the community and sharing information as well helps the economy as well.
Yep,
and this is really great. James, you're doing a great job. Mr. Holloway.
Thank you.
Ms. Morgan?
So you mentioned what I was going to bring up, which is the business development, John Talmadge and the business development unit of the Horizon Council. So I think they would be a great partner. But that still gives me the opportunity to say thank you to Attorney Holloway for winning the battle over providing the information, because I loved your presentation about the law and the background. And I will say to Attorney Williams, thank you very much for tamping things down and making them more realistic. This was a great presentation. I feel like I learned a lot, and I really do understand what it is you're trying to accomplish, and it would be great if the business community could really hear what it is that you are trying to do. So thank you.
Ms. Fisher, do you have?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to start with saying what I always say is that I think that we are the economic driver for this community based on the fact that we are an education institution and all the other things that Mrs. Patrica mentioned, along with the diversity of our programs and the impact that we have in many facets of the community. So my colleagues have asked most of my questions, but one of the notes that I made as I was writing feverishly was about partnerships, and have we had any preliminary conversations with the Lee County Economic Development Office or any of those other groups, or is that in a long-range plan, or were you going to bring it to us first and then see? Because I know our procurement and finance people communicate with those entities and the university on an ongoing basis. So I didn't know if that was part of the picture or not, or a piece of the puzzle.
I think it was absolutely part of the picture. In fairness to our department, I know Frederick Ross, who's no longer with us, was engaging in some of those conversations, as well as Susan Millay. So yes, that has started. I think we can expand it, though, as we've identified here today. So.
And in your amazing presentation, And I really like your passion and sense of humor, Mr. Holloway. I heard you say, I thought I heard you say that, we really basically need to get our ducks in a row before we even consider a consultant. So you mentioned something about needing the correct data. And so do we know what we need, or is that something we have to discover? And is there a way that we can start to work towards that?
Yeah, so we actually have a comprehensive list of what the consultants are going to ask for, and that's just by way of a lot of the information that Mr. Williams has sent me, given his expertise and experience, and just reviewing past studies. And to Dr. Amy and Susan Millay and everybody over in budgeting, Kelly Letcher, to their credit, they've already started to facilitate the process of getting more information. What we sort of started talking in depth about is a repository to keep all the information, the format in which we keep it, and kind of making different parts of the information translate into other parts. So it's somewhat complex, and we'll get IT involved, and we'll do more things in order to make sure that we're absolutely efficient in what we provide to our consultant. But that process is already underway. Frederick Ross, and again, they've been super receptive to everything that we've said. It was also a matter of what we can mandate versus what we could request.
Right.
And so at this point, we don't necessarily have the legal support to basically require that anybody provide us with anything, but I think we can kind of build it into our processes and kind of incentivize the fact that we have prime contractors actually give us the information with regards to what they're doing with subcontractors. It's more work for them, but I think that as a large organization doing business with us and them helping us achieve our diversity goals, I think will be well worth it for them.
Thank you very much. That's awesome.
Okay, Ms. Gividelli?
Well, I just came in on the end of it, so I'll have to really watch the video. But I do actually have one little question that I know I've looked at other districts, and when they're doing the process, vendor process, the RFQ process, and so forth, they actually, when it comes back to the board for an agenda item, they actually state at the bottom of the actual item about how many how many minorities they actually solicited for that vendor. And I thought that was really important and valuable, because sometimes it was 0, sometimes they would say 2 or 3, and I think it's just more of awareness and make it a point that we're seeking the minority vendors. So that's the only little piece I have to add.
Okay, I think we're running long, but
Super quick, have we considered contacting the Community Foundation to see if they could bring us all together in this?
We have now. No, honestly, we had not, but that's a great suggestion.
okay, I have just a couple things, and how much more did you have? Because we're running really long.
We're done. I think, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I like so many of the comments that were made here today. 3 things. First, EDAC. What role do you see with the EDAC Advisory Committee on this?
Personally, I see EDAC playing a role. One of the things that would have been a recommendation, and it's on the list, and I didn't want to go over everything, is that, and not that I want to create another committee, but you typically have a committee specifically designed to look at these issues, and you bring together multiple community organizations, trade organizations, as well as whether there's a representative from EDAC on the committee that wants to sit on both, or there's ways we can design around it. But I think when you're going to get feedback from input on these things, I think we certainly would take these policies if they wanted to be, to those committees as well.
Right. Well, that makes sense that it would have to go beyond EDAC, but certainly I can see this would be something very, very interesting to that particular committee. So
absolutely,
we can talk to see if there's time for at least a mini presentation on what you've been talking about. I actually, before I heard the comments from my fellow board members, had written down Lee Health, FGCU. I know there are other large businesses that are centrally located right here in Lee County. And I was thinking, after the COVID and kind of pulling together other ideas, Ms. Patrica said community organizations. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have, when the COVID's done, a forum on this? I mean, a really large weekend, take a weekend and have the presentations on this, and maybe even do classes, develop some, and perhaps Lee Health and some of these other organizations already have videos or, things that they've already created so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And maybe we can steal from Miami-Dade or another.
Not stealing, because I created it. So.
Or some other organization or government entity or school district that has a good way to present this. But that's why it's great to be able to talk at the dais, because you put different ideas together. And that's one thing I'd love to see eventually, is a weekend forum, including as many organizations as possible. And yeah, we are an economic driver, because if we don't produce, our graduation rates are going up, and that's what we want. We want our graduates, and we want to produce the kinds of people with our expanded career education, the kinds of people that don't just want to go out and be a welder, not that there's any problem with that, but want to be a welder and look also at the same time to business classes, to starting their own construction business or whatever business, because heaven knows we need those things. So this should be of interest to absolutely every member of our community. And I don't know if it's premature under the policies. Looks like the slide changed, but what was the top one? The commercial business policy, wasn't that a commercial business policy, kind of to mesh with our non-discrimination policy? Is it too early? Is it appropriate? I can, Ms. Dupree-Bruno weigh in on this, to get some kind of consensus from the board to see if we would like Mr. Holloway, Ms. Dupree-Bruno to start looking at just, that looks like the most generic of those. Is it, Ms. Dupree-Bruno, is it too early to get a consensus on that?
I think it's a little too early. Allow us the time to review the policies, and then it will move forward in the regular course, the regular process.
Okay, so that's something we can revisit when time allows. Now, we're actually only about 10 minutes over. I saw another hand somewhere. We can do a couple more quick questions, and then we need to wrap up and move on.
Okay, and my quick question is, I know they have the, like the vendors invitation or whatever that is, where they all come in and, well, I'm not sure if they did it this year, but they have in the past, where they invited all the vendors to come in. So even perhaps at that time, this information could be obtained as well, to them.
Absolutely, and to Ms. Vaughn's point, I think that's a great suggestion that you had in terms of that weekend, or at least an event. There's also ways to incorporate our adult ed programs, as well as facilitate programs between our vendor community and our students to allow for opportunities for internships and things that could ultimately lead to potential employment after high school and or college. And you could work with FGCU as well, or our FSW. And then it also, it exposes them to these areas, as you mentioned, plumbing or what have you. and also gives an opportunity for them to stay in our community, because a lot of our students leave, go off to university, and don't ever come back. But if they have an employment opportunity straight out of high school or while in high school to be exposed to a local organization, they may very well go to the university and come back. And so we get the benefit of keeping some of our good students here.
A quick second.
Yes,
one?
I
Okay.
just wanted to mention, to add to your list, the collaboratory, because that is their function to do this type, organize this type of thing of community organizations and groups. So if you just add that to your list.
Thank you, Ms. Giddens. And I didn't forget your question as it related to gender-specific programs. I'm just I'll transmit that to you offline.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yeah, great presentation. Obviously, it's gotten our collective, well, not a collective brain, but our individual brains, which can become collective brain here, right? Spinning. So I think it's something that we have to revisit. I see a whole lot more on here, the resources and all of that, but definitely let's revisit, and I'm sure some of the board members will think of even more questions to, so that you don't get bored and you have plenty of things to do in your office.
Right.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, our next is from, let's see, this is financial, business services. So CARES Act briefing, and who's going to be presenting? I have, is Ms. Kennedy, she's presenting? No? Okay.
Sarah Cox.
Sarah? Okay, Sarah Cox is the coordinator for business services, and she's going to be presenting on the CARES Act.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah Cox, and here with me is Ms. Terry Kennedy, Director of Grants and Program Development. We are here today to give you an update on our CARES Act dollars. I'm going to pull up this document that was shared with you in the backup to the briefing. If it will come up. Okay, well, it doesn't seem to want to pull it up, so I hope that you all have this document in front of you. So we wanted to share this with you today to show you the information that we're reviewing and looking at a monthly basis internally. This document was developed to track and monitor our spending with our CARES Act dollars, and then be prepared to take any make any adjustments as needed as we look at it. So I'm sure, as you all know, that there's been a lot of scrutiny from the state level. I'm sure you've heard it from your colleagues at the state, and in a way, rightfully so. When you look at this document, you can see we in Lee County, like in many other districts, have spent little CARES Act dollars. And so I can see from the state's perspective them saying, hey, districts, you know, you've gotten this influx of money and you haven't spent it. But I think it's equally important that we share the other side of the story into how, why we're here today. So you can see, like our largest grant, ESSER, the state gave us very little time to submit applications for these grants. I mean, it was a 2 to 4 week turnaround. We had an influx of these dollars, and they said to us, which was not a requirement from the U.S. Department of Education, but from the Florida Department of Education, that said pretty much you can't supplant. So any existing initiatives that we had going, with the exception of direct COVID expenses, we were not able to fund through any CARES Act dollars, which led us to creating new initiatives to address some of the impacts that COVID has had on our district. And as you can imagine, some of those things take some time to get up and running. So this document, the first page that we have shared with you, is just the overall view of our CARES Act. There's a few different programs that fall within that. We have ESSER, the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which we commonly refer to as ESSER, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, which we refer to as GEAR, the Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, referred to as HERF, and then a small pot of money that we've gotten from the Department of Health and Human Services. So this document kind of gives us that one view type of look at all of our dollars underneath CARES. There's a lot of information in this document, but again, it just gives us that one look snapshot. So on here, we have each specific grant. There are several grants that fall under each program, and so under that program is the exact title of the grant award, the funding purpose that comes from the request for application that we get from the Department of Education, the status of each of one of those grants. So you can see that as of today, there are 2 that are pending award, because again, all of these have been coming in sporadically over the last 6 months. And then the FTE, or positions that are funded from each grant. And then where we're at with our spending as of February 9th. You can see the percent spent, the dollars remaining. The total cash requested is something that we've been looking at, because as you may be aware, our grants are not, we don't receive the cash in advance. They're on a reimbursement basis. Who is the project manager of each one of these awards, and then the award period. And you can see there are a few of them that extend into September of 2022. We've also included on this document for you non-CARES grant awards that we have received. We just thought it was important to track this information as well. So these are grant awards that we have received specifically related to COVID, but they are not funded through the CARES Act. So in the CARES Act portion of this document, it is important to remember that each piece has a requirement to share funds with charter and private schools. Charter and private schools may not have necessarily participated in every single grant because of maybe some of the stringent assurances required in some of them, or that when the grant award in total was so small that when spread between all the entities, it really wasn't worth them to participate. So the next page is just a breakdown of our ESSER grants. And so we get a little more detailed here of the specific activities going on in the grants, where we are at with the budget and expense. And then we also put on here the anticipated duration of the expense. We felt this was important because, again, we know there's some scrutiny over districts not spending the money, but we felt in Lee County that it was best to utilize and maximize these funds over the full 2 years rather than try to just get, one bang for our buck and spend it all in 1 year. We felt that with the uncertainty of COVID and what it would bring, that it would be best to maximize these dollars over the 2 years. I won't go line by line through any of this, but some of the major things that we're doing out of ESSER, the main ESSER grant is tutoring, extended tutoring for some of our high schools, as well as an additional 30 minutes for middle schools. We're also looking at adding some tutoring in high school credit retrieval programs as well. Yeah, and then the mental and psych services, we've invested a lot of money into some contracted services for that as well. So under GEAR, this is a smaller pot of money compared to ESSER, and the biggest program here is our summer recovery grant. It was intended just to be through October 31st, but the state provided us a no-cost extension for additional time to spend the funds through April 1st, because a lot of districts were just having a lot of money left over. So we've invested this money into extended learning opportunities and look for it to be our first CARES Act grant closing in April. There are a few others on here, one of which is still pending award. We then go on to HERF, and this funding source is primarily for our post-secondary schools. There's a dedicated amount per the law that should be spent on student financial aid, and you'll see that sporadically in this document. And then the last piece is our funds from the Health and Human Services, which was specifically to be spent on PPE or other health-related services due to COVID, and we have subsequently spent this money. So I'm sure you're aware that we also have a second round of stimulus dollars coming. We have not heard any information really from the state on when that will come, what it will look like. We have heard that it's going to be about 4 times the amount of funds we have received to date through CARES. For example, ESSER, which we are referring to as ESSER 2.0, is anticipated to be about $75 million. So how and when the state will release that information, we're really not sure, but we have heard that they may use it as gap funding, so funding we may lose through the FEFP. We have also heard that they may require we spend ESSER 1 dollars first, which would kind of create some hurdles, especially given that there's funds there that we don't necessarily have control over with charters and privates. But we are anxiously awaiting to get some information from the state on that. And then possibly, you know, with President Biden's proposed stimulus package, there could possibly be a third round. So we're very thankful for this money. We're trying to do our due diligence in tracking and make sure we're spending it in the best manner as possible. So with that, I will turn it over and see if you all have any questions.
Okay. Mrs. Jordan?
Thank you for all this. And actually, I just heard all of this, what you just said, because all the other districts are going through the same thing. So can you explain the difference of awarded and then received? Because even though we're awarded the funds,
yes,
and we're spending it, we don't have the money.
Yes, so the only grant that is, the status is received is the Provider Relief Fund, and that's because we didn't actually have to, we applied for the funds in a way, but it wasn't through like the formal grant process that we go through with DOE, and we didn't receive an award for it. We really just applied for the money and they sent us the money. Whereas all these other grants that you're seeing on here as awarded or pending award, we will physically receive a grant award notice for.
Okay, and then also the, can you explain the private school set aside?
Yes, the private school set aside is a requirement of the CARES Act that is an equitable services requirement that we see in a lot of our grants. It just requires us to allocate a certain amount of funds for private schools should they wish to participate. And that is one thing that we have heard in the second stimulus package, that private schools will have their own grant awards. They will not be part of ours in the second stimulus.
Okay, and then the last question is what you just mentioned about the second stimulus, that they may take that money and put it into, use it for our,
yeah, to fill the gap in the FEFP.
Correct.
Yes, ma'am, we have.
So is there something we should be doing to try for that not to happen? Because we still need that money.
Yeah, that's why we're just kind of waiting to see. I did call DOE a couple weeks ago to see if they would give us any information on where they were going with ESSER 2.0, what that may look like, because as you know, I mean, we are planning for FY22 now, so it would be helpful to know, but they were very tight-lipped on sharing any information about that, so we're kind of just treading lightly and trying to take the necessary precautions to be prepared to maximize that funding as well.
Thank you.
We actually have training going on right now on the title funding and some of this, and DOE is involved in presenting some of the information. We hope that tomorrow we should receive additional information, but because they started with talking a little bit about ESSER 2 and the flexibility with the funding. So hopefully tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay, board members? Mrs. Patrica?
This is exactly what I was looking for. As we talk to our legislators, and the perception is that we got all this CARES Act money, so now we can cut your budget. I can now explain to them why that's not true. So I appreciate that. And also, I appreciate that you've been very deliberative and thoughtful in how you're spending some of this money. For example, the tutoring at East and Dunbar. You know, those principals may not have known 3 months ago how that money could best be spent, but as they see their students progressing or not, and they see the data coming out of the classrooms, they're in a better position to understand what those kids need. So Also really smart to not use it all up front, because next year we're going to be hurting as well. Because, you know, the learning slide is not just from the fourth quarter of last year, but it's occurring throughout this school year as well. So this is fantastic.
Thank you. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize the intangible effects that COVID has had on districts. You know, they think, oh, you have all this money, it should just solve your problems and you should be well on your way. But there's so many learning gaps and mental health things that we're trying to tackle, that we're trying to utilize this money for, because we're hopeful that we will still have the FEFP money to carry out the things that we would normally do. And these funds would be used to supplement the additional things that we would like to accomplish.
And that's the key. It can't be used to supplant. That was, you said it perfectly. So thank you.
Other questions? Anybody? Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you all so much.
Enlightening, and we appreciate the work that both of you, or all of you, do. Okay. Next on our agenda, we move to operations and VPAA communication plan. And according to, it looks like, yes, Kathy Eba, Executive Director, Operational Planning and Projects, and Adam Malloy, Coordinator of Community Engagement. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Board. Adam and I are looking forward to bringing to you our plan for bringing to the community the discussion about what we should do at Veterans Park Academy for the arts. So our goal in this is to develop and receive community input and consensus about what and how we should merge the two campuses in a way that meets those needs. And when I say merge, it's not necessarily a merger of the schools as one school, but it is a sharing of identity and sharing of resources in a way that makes sense between the old Lambs campus, or what will become the old Lambs campus, and the VPAA campus. The current status for this project is that we are in negotiations with the architect, the construction manager, and a building official, and we are excited to be able to do this at the time that they have been identified, so that they can be aware of what we're working on with the community, they can hear the discussion, and they can take that information and build it into their efforts to design and construct a campus or campuses that meet the needs that the community is stating. We have had a number of district meetings, and we've evaluated things like the potential of capacity arrangements between the two campuses or within the campus, what the construction timeline for the project would look like. We've evaluated what a K-8 would look like, what a mega school would look like, what separate schools would look like, and what the campus is and how it could use the portables as swing space through the construction project. The public input process that we're going to look at will take us a few months, or at least a couple of months, as we go through and talk to the VPAA staff and parents. We'll also be talking to the Greater Lehigh Acres community. And then on March 30th, we will have a community visioning workshop at the VPAA Star Cafe. The goal of all of this is to provide information, to learn and listen to options, and prioritize with the community what they see as the future. So that's kind of the project at the 50,000 view. Adam's going to get into the actual details of how we're going to do this.
Good afternoon, Board. So in terms of the public input components, this really is a communication position for the school district. As a school district, we are mandated to listen as stewards of the community, and we really want to prioritize listening in a formal way to the community and their perspectives on the VPAA project. We do have a visioning workshop that is scheduled on March 30th, designed to inform and also identify critical questions concerning the project. We will have a brief presentation of considerations and also small groups with district staff. This is somewhat based on our community forum protocol. Really, the entire goal is to understand the community's expectations for the Veterans Park Academy for the Arts project, and also to process feedback and present to the board, prioritizing their considerations. This is something that I think is extremely important for us as a district, to set an example. Instead of formal telling, we are formal listening. This is something that I think we need to do more of, and I know that we're incorporating that in terms of our processes, and I think the payoff will be huge. Now, this public input stakeholder list is not exclusive. These are just nodes of initial contact. Groups that we have already had communication and presentations in the recent months. East Lee Education Collaboration and their regional impact, I think, is extremely important for this project, not to mention faith-based partnerships in working at the neighborhood level. So if you want to think of church, play, and need in terms of neighborhood organization, that is extremely important. Our general philosophy here is that proper school and community development is only possible when people in the community have a voice in the public conversation. And that change, as it relates to the Veterans Park project, is only sustainable and deep when individual and collective action are tied together. We will promote this communication regarding the event via district channels, social media, community partnership communication platforms, grassroots, media, radio, TV, print, and apps on our phones. And there is the potential for use in ongoing community-wide study circles.
One of the reasons that the workshop is so late in March is so that we have an opportunity to reach out to this group, this diverse group. We want to have an opportunity to really reach as many people as we possibly can before we do the full community workshop, so we can get as diverse a participation at that workshop as possible. We want the community to hear from themselves as much as we want them to hear from us. And if we can do outreach ahead of time, then the workshop will have a more diverse and collaboratory impact at the end.
Just a very general timeline for the next 3 months. February, we're looking to really inform, outreach, and really touch base with the topic to a number of our community stakeholders. Small group meetings are always possible in collaboration with our stakeholders that were in the previous slide. In March, we're really setting up that vision workshop. And then April, I believe we have it scheduled, Ms. Ebal, on the 13th for feedback brought back to the board. So we're excited about this project, and we understand that this project is only going to be successful as the strength of our connection with the community in the area.
At that, if we have any questions or comments or feedback about the process as we've outlined, we welcome that.
Just one thing I want to add to this before we get into the questions. The other thing that we're going to do behind the scenes, and this is not a planning issue, this is Chiefs and the Academic Services Division, is we believe it's critically important that education drive this decision in terms of what is best from an educational perspective. So whatever decision, whatever blessing the board makes, you're going to make it with the knowledge of what the recommendation would be from myself and also from the academic services team. So in terms of what the research is regarding what the programs should be there, what the configuration should be there, you at least have that perspective prior to making a final decision to what direction the board would like to go in terms of what it'd like to see at that campus. So that is and continues to go on behind the scenes, and you will have that information again prior to the decision, as will the community. I mean, that's one thing I think we will share as a part of this, particularly the latter portions of this communication plan. Thank you.
Okay, board, questions, comments? Mrs. Gibbs?
I have one question in that throughout all of the plans, it's called VPAA, which lends the statement to me that the decision has already been made as to however it's configured, it's already been named.
So we say VPAA, but once again, this hasn't been determined how this configuration is going to be made. As we mentioned earlier, we're looking to provide a unification in terms of how the collaboration between the campuses work, but it does not necessarily mean that it will be one campus or one program. That is very much up for discussion. The one thing that we have talked about is wanting to be able to share the ideas of an arts program, whether it happens at one school as a large school, or if it happens at two campuses with shared resources. There's lots of flexibility in terms of how this might happen, even in terms of the naming of the campuses, all of that could be discussed and is up for evaluation.
Well, in the discussions that you've had before, it just seems as though the idea of the black box theater is driving everything else rather than everything else driving the black box theater, but that's a discussion that I'm sure you will have.
I would want to respond to that, and that is that, yes, I mean, that is certainly something that we've been talking about for that school for a long, long time, even prior to the decision to move the middle school at Lambs to the MM campus. Again, part of this has been a concern for equity in the different zones. You know, if you look at North Fort Myers Academy of the Arts has a nice auditorium. We do not have that for our programs in the east, so that's certainly something that we've discussed. But I can't, I would not say that, I cannot say, and I don't agree with, a characterization that the black box theater is driving any of the decision-making here. I think the biggest driver here for all of this is the fact that two things. One, we needed to respond to growth in the East Zone. And second, I really believe it's important for us to do something for that facility that's currently Lehigh Acres Middle School. So those two goals we're going to be able to achieve.
And I will just, add to that. I understand what you're saying, and I agree about the equity. But looking at it from a higher level, I honestly feel that equity starts with getting rid of more of the portables and having more students in brick and mortar than having the black box theater. I understand the black box theater, and yes, it's a wonderful thing. Is it a priority to making sure we don't have as many students in portables as we have there, comparing them to the rest of the district? So I have said that before, and that is one of my main concerns. Our priorities, how do we decide to set that up? The last question I have...
and please let me respond to that if you bring it up, just as a response. I think that is one of our highest priorities. As I said, just now, it was addressing growth in that zone, A, and B, taking care of renovating, I think, a facility that needs to be taken care of. And again, that's providing equity as well, because I think our students deserve to go to a facility that is similar to what we see surrounding that particular building. So we are addressing growth with this plan and addressing, I think, a need for renovation that's long past overdue.
And I don't want to belabor it, but I do want to say, when we're talking about giving those students an equitable arts experience, the students in the other parts of the district that do have black box theaters do not have, along with that, as many classes in temporary and portable situations. So that's what I'm looking at, if we're going to be equitable. And
well, again, I mean, remember, we have had these issues with portables in other zones. This is the East's turn.
And I understand.
But
I understand that.
okay, then, but I guess my question is, why do we continue to come back and readdress this? And I'm sorry to say it that way, but we've answered that question.
Yes, but we have not removed that many portables.
But we are
and
just
I'm
in the
not-
process of
Okay,
working.
Superintendent, I'm not getting into that conversation right now. I'm seeing the looks and everything from the rest of the board, so that is not a discussion. That is not what I brought up. I made my statement because I wanted to let everyone know and understand where I'm coming from with this. And there are community members that feel the same. The question, another question that I would have really quickly is, in going out, Adam, to the community and all of the meetings that have already been held, what is the message that was presented? Because if these meetings have already been held and people have been explained, it's been explained that we're going to do this, this, and this, it's kind of counterproductive to go back and say, now we're going to get the community involved.
Yeah, to that point, the community contact that's already been made was not relative specific to the VPAA project, but more general school reopening and proximity plan contact. So this was just using those nodes of contact to say, hey, we're having this vision workshop. This is what we see is happening at the workshop, and this is what we really want to accomplish with the workshop, which is for the community to prioritize their considerations, portables being one of them, and then for us to come back to the board with us processing and analyzing the community's feedback. So there has not been project specific on VPAA presentations done by myself, but in the previous months, I have made contact with all of those groups relative to different topics.
Okay, and as you know, I did ask to be a part of that, but I was never contacted to do so. The final thing is there a way, and I know that there is, but some possibility of having just a spreadsheet that shows the different zones and the building projects, and especially in the East Zone, how we received the other day, let me say it this way, we received the other day a list of the portables, but I'd like to see another column that has the different projects, and how does this project here affect this number that you have shown me, and how does this project affect this number until we get down to below 100. So, yeah, I don't know, Ms. Eba, and I can talk with you offline to explain what I'm looking for and how that would look. And thank you so much for all that you're doing.
Okay, board, other questions, comments?
If I may, through the chair, address Ms. Gittens. Ms. Gittens, I sit in these meetings week after week after week, and I hear your passion and I hear your desire, and I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to find a way to support you in this, and I'm really not clear on how to do that. I mean, they just brought us a presentation in answer to your request for community engagement, and this seems very thorough to me, and yet there was still some criticism of it. That's the first piece where I need some understanding. I can see that you're not reacting well to this, but I don't know how to have this conversation other than sitting here. I really want to reach common ground. I really want to find a way to compromise and move forward. But I also know that each meeting we're bringing up the portables and we're bringing up the equity issue. And I believe that has been addressed. That has been addressed to my satisfaction. And I want to remain focused on our values as a district. But I need you to understand that when I look at the data, and that's what our board attorney tells us to do all the time, look at the data, where have schools been built in the past 20 years in this district? Where are schools being built now? Schools are being built now where there are portables, but that doesn't mean that we can ignore growth in other parts of the community.
Okay, Miss Patrica, I'm afraid that you're comments are devolving into criticism that we...
No, I don't mean it to be criticism.
Well,
I'm really trying to
it's
figure
coming
out-
across that way to me.
Can I please
and-
respond?
And
That it's.
When can we talk
let's-
about this? If not here,
Okay,
when can
can
we
I
talk
just
about
please,
this?
can I please address
no, we're
that?
not going to get into a debate.
Can we have a point of order, please? Because
Yes.
it should be through the chair. Board members should not be engaging back and forth, back and forth.
Yeah.
So
Point of order, thank you. And I don't want this to become a debate, and I'm sorry if, no, actually, I'm not sorry. Let's move ahead, because I don't want this to devolve into
Ms. Vaughn.
a match like this.
Ms. Vaughn.
Yes.
One thing I would recommend is allow Ms. Patrica to finish. And if Ms. Gittens has a response, allow her to respond, and then we can move forward.
All right, but can both of you please try to keep it less critical personally of each other and more on the realm of the discussion regarding this presentation?
I was really not trying to be critical. I'm really trying to get to a place where we both understand the same information in the same way. And that's where I feel like I don't understand where you're coming from. I'd like to understand where you're coming from so that I can be where you are. I'm really trying to find a point of compromise. Those are my comments.
Okay, Ms. Gittens, do you care to respond?
This district has been in effect for well over 130 some years. And sometimes organizations, as they grow, have to stop and look and listen at difference, at the way things can be possibly done differently. And unless someone makes that statement, makes those suggestions, we could have a tendency to be going on for another 130 years doing it the same way, because that is the way we do it. I understand that my comments are not well received. They are very often, like we have always we've talked about this and talked about it. But I'll give you one example. I gave planning kudos yesterday, did I not, about developing the new process. I believe to my heart and soul that if I had not continued to ask questions, to continue to bring up situations, that would not have happened. If I had not continued to say community involvement, I am not saying Gwen, I am not saying what some of my colleagues are saying to the people in the public, that I'm just all about me and like to hear myself. That is not what it's about. I am about the three things that I always say: equity, inclusion, and communication. That does not happen unless everyone is allowed to participate. I'm not allowed to participate the way many of the rest of you are. And that's a debate you can have with yourselves. I know that for a fact. But I have a job of oversight. That is why I'm here. It is an issue that I brought up when I first came. And when I see it moving, I will stop talking about it.
Ms. Vaughn, I think at this point, the comments have been made. We can move forward to the next board member that may have a comment specifically on the presentation that was made.
Yes, let's,
Right, I do have a
let's go back to other board members that have comments. I'll get back to you in a little bit, Ms. Patrica. Ms. Morgan, do you have a comment, question about the presentation? Okay, Ms. Jordan, do you have a comment?
I was just
or a
gonna say
question about the presentation?
Yes, only about the presentation.
Good.
Thank
That's
you.
why I'm phrased it
I
in
would
that
just like
way.
to say thank you for putting this together with the timeline and everything. I really appreciate it.
Ms. Fisher, do you have a comment or question about this presentation?
I do not have a comment about the presentation.
Okay. Ms. Giovanelli, comment or question
I do.
about the presentation?
Okay, thank you. So I appreciate the community involvement. I think that's really important. I feel like it's a little bit after the fact, but I guess it's a work in progress. So my question is, I went back and I'm having a hard time from yesterday about the expansion. So I think this is the best time to talk about it. So I went back and looked at when we were out there and did the little ceremony of writing on the beam and all that, and I had taken pictures of the schematic from RG Architects. So are you telling me that the buildings that we had a picture of is not part, that is separate from, and you're going to add an additional building to that expansion that we went and christened and everything in September?
Yes.
Okay, so
There will be, the building that you saw is the building that is currently under construction and will open this August. The expansion is an additional building for 12 student stations, 12 classrooms, that will be adjacent to that building.
Okay, so you're telling me that was an oversight, that building was forgotten, and that's why we didn't do it in the fall? I mean, I don't understand how you build a new school and then having an expansion right on top of it, and that's obviously a separate budget. Now that's a separate expense, a whole separate architect and management and fees. So that should have all been included. If not, I don't understand how I don't understand this. So I'm having a really hard time because we're spending additional money that should have, that's 2 times. I mean, I don't know. So somebody explain that to me.
The reason that we're doing it as part of J is so that we don't have the double fees. When we determined that it was appropriate to build that additional building, it was already too long, we were already too far down the process of building the current campus. Because we were getting ready to build J, we saw an opportunity to identify those same cost savings that you're talking about by having one architect and one construction management team doing the project. So that is why we added it to the J project so that we could recognize the same savings that you're mentioning without going back into the original contract and delaying the time and all the other work that would have had to be done because we were too far down the process with the construction of the original MM.
Okay.
Does that help clarify the
Kind of.
question?
So we knew this in September, but I didn't know it. I mean, I don't, as a board member, I don't recall anyone saying anything to me about we're going to have to build this additional building down the road, in a couple months. So that's what so when did this, when did this happen? When did this?
It was as we've been doing evaluation, which we do every year of our capacity needs and demands, and knowing that we were getting ready to build J, we had this discussion about how could we provide for the capacity demands that we were recognizing in the East Zone, and therefore we added it to the J project so that we could still recognize all of the same cost savings that you're asking about, but doing it under this contract. Rather than amending the original contract, which we were already too late to do, we added it to this project. Does that help clarify? I'm trying to help answer your question. I understand what you're concerned about, but it was, by the time September would have happened, it was already too late for us. We were already in the construction phase. We wanted to be able to recognize the timeliness, we wanted to be able to recognize the cost savings, and we wanted to be able to do it all in a way that would fit within the construction process. So since we were getting ready to put an RFQ on the street for the construction of J, we added the MM building to the J so that we would have one construction manager, one architect, one building official doing the project on that campus.
I guess the thing that we need to add here, though, is understand, Ms. Giovanelli, that the original planning process of MM, started a number of years ago. And this is way back, probably 2016 or something. Yeah, so 2016. So this decision relative to the expansion is something that staff brought up relatively recently.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Atkins. As mentioned yesterday by Dominic, Mr. Gemelli, the planning process for the construction of MM has been going on for even predating either one of our positions. He was with the district in a different position. I wasn't even in the district. So this is just every year we evaluate where we are and what we need.
And also predating the current use of Davis demographics in terms of looking at our data. So we've actually become more sophisticated in how we track student populations than we were back in 2016. And I can tell you, even going back further than that, before we engaged with Dr. Van Boeskirk, I think I've got that correct, we were even less sophisticated. So we've improved our ability to predict student populations and where we're going to see growth. It continues to become more accurate, and then we have to revisit certain decisions as a result, and this being one of them.
So we're not continuously evaluating, because then you're telling me really then we didn't evaluate until 2020 from 2016, the East Lee area that is growing, that we've already known that was growing. So I don't understand where,
yeah, and I think actually just the opposite.
Obviously our data seems to be off. And that's costing us more money to now add a building that when we're building a building, add a building and kind of slide it in with building J. I think that is, we've got to reevaluate and relook at like how our things are being done and operated then, because something's not efficient.
I think I would disagree with that wholeheartedly. It'd be just the opposite. I think we have gotten better and more sophisticated. I think that's not an appropriate way to characterize it when we're actually improving our process and becoming better at predicting student populations and growth.
Okay. And
Madam Chair,
And at this,
I think we're going off.
I was about to do that. I just wanted to wait for a lull. I think we have asked and answered on this. And did I see Ms. Patrica, you had your hand up a while ago.
Yes,
you have a question?
I appreciate this proposal. Thank you very much. I do believe, Mr. Malloy, that I know I put a lot of pressure on you probably when I say this, but you can win anybody over. So I'm really confident that with a microphone in your hand, you will be able to get significant community engagement on this issue. I'd also be interested in, Dr. Adkins, an evaluation from Academic Services regarding the educational impacts of putting a black box theater or some other type of building on that campus as opposed to portables. It's my understanding that the arts enhance education significantly. I don't understand arts, but it's my understanding you can show me some data that proves that. So can we have that kind of an analysis going into this conversation about what kinds of buildings we're going to put on that location, please? And thank you. Those are my comments.
Okay, just one
Yes.
more? Okay.
We had
Yes.
her hand up too.
Yeah?
Pass.
No,
My comment was related to the previous conversation.
that's what,
So I'm not going to make it, it's done.
okay, I'm sorry, I missed.
Okay, and it is related to this whole thing, but when we did have the topping off ceremony, I spoke with the builders and the contractors, and they actually took me over and showed me where the addition would be, and I did ask at that time, is there still time to do that? And the answer was yes. So I just want to get that on the record. But I also want to say finally that thank you for your presentation. However, I still feel that if I had not pushed and persevered with the subject, we would not be having this discussion today. And thank you for that.
To your point, your goal and passion to change and tailor how we engage the community together, that bond is reciprocal from my position and from our team's position. So thank you.
Madam Chair, I am concerned about time at this point.
No, I'm going to move it right now. Thank you, Mr. Pre-Bruno. And actually, we are on schedule according to my notes. Anything else that you wanted to present that you didn't have a chance to? No. Okay, thank you so much. And we are moving along to capital project update. Mr. Scott Rickenbacker, Director of Construction Project Management.
Good afternoon, board members. Dr. Atkins, Esquire DeBruno. This is your February 2021 capital projects update. Central energy plant projects and HVAC projects. As you can see, substantial completion for Cape Coral Elementary will be this August, start of school. The job is progressing well. Fort Myers High School, again, substantial completion. February 1st, we're just wrapping that up and making final punch list repairs, and the damage that was created at the field house has been repaired and repainted, so that's made whole. Orangewood Elementary School has just gone through the RFQ process, and the selection committee and review scores and all the responses have been collected, so as soon as that gets voted upon by you folks, we will be engaging with those folks for a contract to get that small project going as well, hopefully after July 1st when the budget rolls. This is one of the latest pictures of Gateway High School. As you can see, the grass is growing, the field sprigging is taking effect. We are shooting for a substantial completion, which means the district takes beneficial use of that campus on March 1st, 2021, next week. They're doing final inspections. The punch lists are just about complete. We've notified insurance and benefits to start putting insurance on that to protect our investment. And we're coming up with a plan for district staff to occupy that building to make sure we have security and protection and the doors are locked. It will be under burglar alarms and fire alarms and so on and so forth. So there'll be different staff that'll be there to ensure the security of that building until the principal goes from the portable campus behind Lehigh Senior and physically moves into that building. These are just some pictures of Building A, the main building. Obviously, that's their media room, their TV production room, green screen. There's the front desk. The gymnasium, everything's wrapped up in there. Sound system sounds great in the gym. All the locker rooms, that's cardboard in the center between the stalls, but all the tile work is done, everything's spit and polished. Kitchen equipment is in, been fired up. We actually had the health inspectors go through for their preliminaries, so we're wrapping that all up. Building C is the black box theater. That's all done in punch list mode, and as Tina said, the sound system is absolutely amazing in that facility. The lights, all the sports lighting are in place and lit, and again, as I said before, the grass is growing. This is just a picture of the MM Middle School, or the new Lamb School. The picture you see to the right is the front office area production where all the pigeonholes are for the teachers, mail. First floor drywall is 100% complete. Second and third floors, drywall and paint. Painting and ceiling tiles are 90% complete in Building 2. In the central energy plant, we have the chillers running. We have permanent power, and we're starting up all the HVAC equipment. And we just toured Ms. Gittens through there last week, and I think you can see it's coming along pretty good. And I did send some current aerials today to the superintendent, so you get a real-time look at how that's progressed, and it's really starting to shape up. And again, that is scheduled for a substantial completion of July 15th, 21. We do believe they'll be substantially complete before then, maybe around mid-May, potentially. Sorry about this graphic. This is me and my red Sharpie. I don't have the computer technical skills. So for everyone on the MM campus, this is J, and where you see the dashed red line in the J, that would be the rough footprint of where J Elementary will be housed. Okay. And right now, again, based on your approvals, we'll begin negotiating with architects, CM, and a building official to begin that process for the J build as well as the addition onto the MM campus. And the MM campus, just so you folks are clear, it is not an addition building. It's an addition onto the existing building. And we pointed out to Ms. Gittens exactly where that would occur on the building and where we punch through the exterior walls, which we already designed in anticipation, and connect it right in. So the stair tower of the existing building will be utilized for those 12 classrooms as well. We already have figured in our water, our electric, our HVAC loads to accommodate that for any future build as well. So all of that will be ready to plug and play when we're complete. Estero Pre-K 8 formerly was the K Elementary and NN Middle School. It is now a hybrid combined Pre-K 8 campus. Right now, we just received our schematic design, and it's complete. We just received estimates formally. I can give you some figures that I've just pencil scratched down to let you know where we're heading financially on that. The original 30% documents, we call that schematic documents, when they came in, we have both the CM and we have the architect provide us with a projected estimate of cost. The first 30%, the CM came in at $81,400,535. The architect came in at $85,040,874. We are now at finishing through schematic or design phase, which is 60%. The CM is down to $68,853,599, and the architect's number has come down to $72,494,200. So as you start tightening up and those bids come closer and closer, I believe you're going to be somewhere around that $70 million mark for this building. Portable projects, Bonita Springs. This is, we deployed 4 portables to help aid, since the historic building is basically closed down, to help aid the principal down there for his administration and his clinic functions and administration staff. They're permanently being set in that parking area, and we're getting ready to start powering them up with water, data, telephone, and all the appurtenances needed to run a small office. We've also had a second subsequent structural review of that campus. We had some extra money left over in my original review, and there's a section of the historic, it's a 1-story section, not underneath the 2-story. And that housed the art room, and it housed another classroom space. And he asked, would there be a potential of him using that since it's not in harm's way under the historic? So what we did is we utilized that leftover money to have the structural engineer and the architect go back out to that school, look above the ceiling, check the beams, make sure nothing's in harm's way and fear of collapse or anything. We have a memo and we're getting a revised report stating that it's safe. So we've put up some temporary barriers to keep people from getting into the 2-story structure, but he can utilize that space now, and we've pretty much made him a happy man. In addition, we're allowing him to use that rebuilt main office section for storage. Again, that's not underneath the 2-story structure, so we might as well use that for a purpose. So we're going to allow him to put the storage that used to be in the historic building on the 2nd floor in that area for safekeeping, and it has humidity control. So that's ongoing. FMTC, right now they went through the RFQ process, and I believe you folks have voted on the architect, the construction manager, and the building official. So contracts and negotiations will be moving forward. There is no substantial construction start as of yet or substantial completion. So once we bring them on board, we give them a chance to digest what the program needs are, then we can start developing that schedule for that project. Oh, and one more thing on that particular project. We're actually wrapping up 2 projects in that. Originally, you had a $10 million FMTC renovation, but we also had in our capital maintenance rotation a re-roof for that campus for approximately $2 million. So we've combined both of those projects into one. So we'll be accomplishing them both at the same time with one CM and one architect designing all of it. So it's just a better way of gaining efficiencies and costs. G. Weaver Hips, obviously that's moving forward. You guys had purchased the property back in October, and we have a architect, construction manager, and building official selected by the board, and we're beginning negotiations and contracts with them as well to get that moving forward. And again, you'll see in the right-hand column, as soon as we determine exactly the needs and how we're going to approach that, we'll be able to provide you with a construction start and a substantial completion projection date. Veterans Park Academy of the Arts. You can see some of the timelines right here. Right now, the board approval is on the 9th, that you guys approved that to move forward. We have not begun negotiations, but once procurement sets up the negotiation process, we'll start negotiating the work to be done on that particular campus. We entered the RFQ status for Riverdale High School. They've awarded BSSW Architectural Services a designer, NV5 is the building official, and Suffolk Construction will be the construction manager as we begin that. And that'll be at least a year-long process of a global site design. And of course, they're going to probably dream big, and then we got to reel it back in, but it'll be about 12 months and we'll come up with a program for that campus. Roofing projects, right now the North Fort Myers High School re-roof project is going very well. You can see by the pictures here, and the schematic you see to the right, everything in dark shaded pink is completed. Everything that's in hashed pink is what we're currently working on. So that project is on schedule, and looking forward to making rainy season and not have any more leaks on that campus. About 75% complete in total. Same thing goes for Cypress Lake High School re-roof. I'm sorry that we don't have substantial completion dates, but that too is to be done in the next 2 months here. So that's just about wrapped up. Oh, I've skipped one. There it is. I'm sorry. Cypress Lake High School. So as you can see, that's just about wrapped up, and that's set to be done in May. The roofing project for the LEPEC building. We had some issues with our building official. We're working it through. We now have an assigned building official, so we'll be releasing the designer and the drawings to go out for bid, and we should be able to begin this shortly. I'm hoping within the next 45 days we'll have a start on this particular roof, marching around the building, replacing the roof. And that ends the update. Any questions?
Thank you. Who has questions, comments on this? Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. My question is, Scott, thank you very much for this presentation. I love looking at all your pictures and the basketball sounds and everything. I love that. The Estero Pre-K-8 and the design and everything there, has that gone out to that community yet? Have they been involved with this?
Planning is working with that, with the village of Estero. There has been no direct community activities with that community at this point. We've been designing. I believe the planning people have been meeting with the Estero Village City Commission or Council, whatever their entity is called, working through those details. We're getting close to a stage where we'll be able to start those meetings. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe planning already has some of those scheduled up following the east zone at the pre-K-8 proposed for the old Lambs and Veterans Park.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking, because I know we've made the comment that we are communicating with them. So I just want to make sure that we are communicating with them through Estero Village. Ms. Ebal.
Good afternoon. So the Village of Estero has met directly with the neighborhoods involved, and we have reached out to them through the village to say that we are also willing, and I believe the village is in the process of scheduling a meeting for us to meet with the village and the community and us to go through their questions and concerns.
Okay. I just want to make sure because of the comments that we have made. And then in the near future, will we be seeing Franklin Park on here?
The status of Franklin Park right now is that we have received the Castaldi, and we are in the process of drafting the document that you saw for, I think it was VPAA. That is a new document that we have started to develop as part of the RFQ and procurement process. So we're in the process of developing the scope for that project, and I think as you have requested, we will make sure that you see the scope before it goes to the RFQ, and then we will proceed with the RFQ. But it is in the queue. We are in the process of working with the school community right now to develop their scope.
Thank you. And you're not speaking about me personally, you're speaking about us.
I am speaking about you in the collective, not you in the personal.
Exactly, thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Eva.
Yeah.
Okay, comments, questions? Mrs. Gittens?
Mr. Rickenbacker, would you do me a favor and pull up slide number
Sure.
9 in your presentation and make it kind of, you know, the plus, make it a little bit big? If you can increase the size of it.
Here we go.
That slide at the bottom can do it as well. Okay, and would you do me one last favor and put the arrow right in the front of the building where that addition is going to go? And if everyone can look, as you look at the building,
Well,
there's
I'm
that
sorry.
small building right in the front, and then the large building right behind. The right-hand side of that building will extend out to basically where that red mark ends. That's where the sidewalk is. You see the cars parked there. And when I went on the tour, it was explained to me that basically it's like taking that wall that's existing right there now and moving it out. I'm not sure how many feet is to the sidewalk. Do we know?
Well, let's see, it'd be 3, so that's 24. It's probably 80 to 100 feet. but-
Okay. And if you can imagine taking that wall, moving it out 100 feet, and then putting the side walls on, that's the extension that we're looking at. I know that some people are visual, and that's why I wanted to show that, because it was very clear to me when I saw it, and it helped me to understand when they say the expansion, what that meant. And I thank all of the, Mr. Rickenbacker and everyone that was on our tour. It was really excellent. I think I may have mentioned before too that I was really impressed with the fact that on the planning committee for this school, they brought in principals like Mr. Drozansky and others that have a middle school that's based on this plan. And they were able to sit there and say, well, we have this plan. If I had it to do again, I would raise this or I would put this here. And I just think that's a wonderful collaboration, and that as we continue to grow, we'll just get that much better with what we produce and have for our students. So that was an excellent thing, and I really enjoyed the tour. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. I also, in your packet, you had the change order reporting for this month. Were there any questions? It's pretty slim, just a handful of contingency adjustments at the Gateway High School project.
Okay, no questions on that part? Okay, other questions on this presentation? Mrs. Giovanelli?
So my question is, once the new middle school is completed, not with the expansion, are students going to be in portables until the expansion is completed then?
I can tell you that the school will be open, class will be underway as we are constructing the addition onto the building. Now, in terms of the children that would populate that, I can't speak to where they are or where their current school year will be come August, but it will not be finished by August. When we get going on it, it'll be erected during the school year.
Okay. And then my other question is regarding, there was some kind of lighting issue, some lights or something at Gateway that some of the the community was, I don't know if it's the lights were bright or in their, do you know anything about that?
We did hear about it, and we're obligated to do a lighting photometric survey at the end of the project, and anything that does not meet the local ordinance, if we have to provide shades on those, the intent was the fixtures were supposed to be zero shed, so I'm not looking to pay for those shields, but if the shields are needed, shields will be put on there to meet the code sections.
Great.
We are aware of it, yes.
All right, thank you. That's it.
Okay, hang on, I have a couple questions about, if you can go back to the Estero screen pre-K 8. I had sent ahead a few questions a couple days ago on the briefing to be please prepared to answer a few questions on this. First of all, what's the status of remediating the water issues, the drainage, flooding issues that were cited by the adjacent community?
Well, it just so happens I have some answers for you today.
Aha, that's why I sent them ahead of time.
Which is why Linda Jo calls me Sunshine. Let me explain how drainage works if you don't know already, and if you do, I apologize if I'm making it too simplistic. We are responsible to manage our water that we disperse on our site, period. I'm not there to fix other developments' problems. That's the development and their engineers' issues. We contain all of our stormwater on our site. We put it in dry detention basins to pull the nutrients out of it, and then it goes out of the South Florida Water Management's designated outfall at the rate that they designed when they designed that whole basin. Mm-hmm. So we will contain our water. None of our site water will flood other neighboring facilities. We design our sites to a 100-year storm event. That's about as high as you get. We usually pay for that extra foot of fill to protect our investment. So we are going to finish our project. Am I going to fix surrounding communities' water issues? No. If there is something I can do that really doesn't cost the district money to help that out, if we could, we will certainly look at that and entertain it, just as we did with our neighbors at Gateway High School. But at this moment in time, we are obligated to manage our own water.
Okay.
So that takes care of that question.
All right. What are the expectations of the Village of Estero regarding the shared use of the fields and recreational land? So I'm looking at the schematic here. Do we have the shared use? Because I believe that's been discussed, where that will be. And I was wondering, how will the public access that? Because isn't it behind?
Well, remember, everything in the shared use is opened up by district staff.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Everything that is in shared use is either opened up by district staff or in the ILA agreement that will be drawn up with the village as to who opens, who has locks, who has keys, who maintains a facility. So they can rent pretty much anything. They can rent the auditorium, they can rent the gym. We have a soccer field for the middle school that we use. If they want to have, midget soccer league out there, they can rent that facility as well. They're drafting an ILA. It's not out there yet, but I'm sure that the Village of Estero will be working with Kathy and her team to develop that.
Okay, and I'm not talking about the indoor facilities. It was my understanding that the village, I know when we had the other site in Estero, that was the discussion, and it was my understanding that there's been discussion about that for this site as well, shared use of fields, a track, or the outside things.
Correct. We have a soccer field.
Okay.
If they choose to join and partner with us in an interlocal agreement to use that field, there'll be maintenance, shared maintenance in the agreement and things of that nature, and times of use where they can use it on weekends and so forth. That's all part of that interlocal agreement.
The shared use has been, we have had discussions preliminarily with the village on this, and we also designed, you're right that the facility, the fields are in the backside, but we designed the bus loop section so that the bus loop section can take care of vehicles after school use, so that they would be able to access that area. And as Scott mentioned, we've already started talking about an interlocal that will establish the parameters by which we establish that agreement, whether it's through cooperative maintenance, whether it's through rentals. We haven't gotten to that detail of the level yet, but the access, which I think is the question you were asking.
That was if it's behind the school.
Well, you have access, they have ability to park everywhere. We've created an extended bus loop, which you're not seeing in this picture. In the picture to the right, you can see it at the top, right before the development. There's a little road that bends, and that's where the bus is staged. We have direct parking in that end there, where if it's a small event, they can park right there and see the event. We have gates and openings in the major parking lot where they can walk down. Now, to answer your question, because I think I know where you're going, no, they're not getting anything for free. In the back.
I didn't ask that.
Well, no, but let me explain. One of the questions was, is there sports lighting there? No, we do not put sports lighting at middle schools. Now, should the Village of Estero like to light that for night kiddie soccer games, we can certainly entertain that on their dime. In addition, I provide one soccer field. I am not paying for the fill as you get closer behind that adjacent neighborhood to raise that elevation up for a second soccer field. However, if the Village of Estero would like to pony up that money to pay for that fill and bring it up, by all means, we will certainly work with them to accomplish that on their dime.
So I was going to ask about the lighting, since a lot of these games will take place at twilight or later. So as a school district, because our schools operate during the day, we're not budgeting lighting for these fields.
Nope, for parity with all of our other prototype schools, we do not provide lighting at that grade elevation.
Okay, and we have the gates and everything to keep the public access to those fields, to keep the school
secure, yes, we do.
secure, and yet the public can access. Okay, and I think that was, yeah, and you mentioned the fill, and I had a question also, about the fill, because that's a significant amount.
Well, the fill for the site in general, or the fill to provide the second field?
Actually, even in general.
In general, this fill project will be the largest we've ever done. We're estimating approximately $4 million in fill.
Wow.
I have the numbers from the other schools, but one thing I want to bring you back in time. Back in 2005, we did off of Bass Road. The name of that school is
I wasn't here then. I wasn't even living here.
Lexington Middle, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Lexington Middle was a $3 million fill job back in 2005 for that road and the pad into the building. You know, that's just a part of the site that you have, getting it up to that level, that 100-year storm event where we were. So if you look at $3 million in 2005, you can imagine what that value would be today.
Yeah, and I bought my house in 2005 at top money. That was a different era, but anyway.
So
that's another
I do have
story.
some statistics. Bonita Springs High School, we imported 130,000 cubic yards of fill for that site. We dug lakes on there to make up the bulk of the rest. You're aware of that. Gateway High School, we dug lakes to provide fill, but we also imported 161,000 cubic yards of fill. Middle School Emmett and J, we dug lakes as well there to help provide some fill, but we also imported 73,530 cubic yards. And our civil engineer, Dana, is projecting 318,000 cubic yards that we're going to have to import for pre-K8 Estero.
Okay, thank you. That answers those questions. We still have, well, relatively short amount of time, but Ms. Gittens, questions?
What is, do you happen to have the amount for that 318,000 cubic yards? And I know there's a formula and all of that, but what kind of price tag is that?
Well, it's a 68.5 acre site, typically delivered FOB job site would be about $14.50 a cubic yard. That's basically the tandem trucks, filled, dropped, delivered. Now, when I did Gateway, or Bonita High School rather, it was about $12.50 a cubic yard. So you can see just in a few years that the price, and going back in the 08s, it was about $8 a cubic yard before the market fell. So with everything escalates.
Yeah. Okay, other questions, comments
The one,
on this? Anybody? Okay, well, thank you so much, appreciate.
Madam Chair, I believe Ms. Gittens had her hand up.
that's okay. We can go on.
I didn't know if you could see it from where you are. I could see it.
Okay, thank you.
You all have a good day.
All right, that takes us to the public comment portion of the meeting. Is there anybody?
Madam Chair, there is no public comment.
That's what I thought. I couldn't see anybody, but I just wanted to make sure. So let's move on to the next thing, which will be board member comments. And let's start in the middle. Miss Jordan.
I have no comments today, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Fisher.
Okay, I saved my comment for now. Due to our requirement to have our conversations at an advertised meeting in compliance with Sunshine Law, I would like to request that when a board member is asking a question, that the board member be allowed to finish what they're saying and then have a response. I feel that we need to work on, as a team, our listening with respect, our communication, and our ability to solve problems rather than having them reoccur time after time after time. So that is my request. I agree with Mrs. Gittens that communicate is a very important word, and unless we do that in an open forum, we cannot resolve some of the issues that we're experiencing that cause us to use a lot of time at meetings. So that's my request.
Okay, duly noted here. I'll make a comment on that when it's my turn. Mrs. Patrica.
Well, y'all know I don't like to give my report at an action meeting, so I am going to give it now. It looks like the governor is moving in the direction of vaccinating teachers over the age of 50. While this is not perfect, it is certainly a step in the right direction. So I'm wondering whether the board would entertain sending a thank you note to the governor, since we did send a request to the governor asking him for that. Is now the time to seek consensus?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, consensus on sending a thank you note to the governor. Okay, so it looks like it's 6 to 1, and so that consensus is followed.
So
we will be sending, we'll be drafting a note, a thank you note for Governor DeSantis's opening I'm trying to figure out a way to say this, opening the vaccinations to teachers age 50 and over.
I was able to judge invention fair projects online. It was done online for the very first time this year. The good part was I, got to hang out in my sweatpants on a Saturday and do it. The bad part was I didn't get to interact with the kids. The littles in particular, the elementary school kids didn't have videos, whereas the older children did. The middle and elementaries had videos uploaded and gave their presentations orally on the video. And I mean, there's nothing like being at a fair and interacting with the kids for sure. But given the circumstances that we're in, it was a really wonderful experience. And Gary Nelson, the guy that runs that part of the fair, was just unbelievable. I mean, he was his emails were so clear and so easy to follow, and he refuses to take any credit. He says it's all about the team. But anyways, it was just a fantastic opportunity for me, and I wanted to thank Gary for that. I want to recognize Rick Parfit, I don't think he's here, for being recognized for the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Commissioner's Medal, which recognizes his key role in the development and implementation of Florida's strategy for targeted violence prevention. I thought that was really cool. I want to give a shout out to Riverdale High School for their AP Computer Science Principals Female Diversity Award in CSP. Don't ask me what CSP is. It's the name of a course. My daughter took it last year. I think I've told you before that in taking CSP, she's now interested in technology, whereas before she was just interested in engineering and science. But now, because of CSP, she's interested in that too. So I think CSP is a really good opportunity for kids to get exposure to technology and coding and whatever else it is she learned how to do in that class. And obviously, that's taking place at Riverdale as well. February 17th, Dr. Atkins presented the Career and Technical Continuum presentation to the House Secondary Education and Career Development Subcommittee. I have to say that you did an outstanding job, Dr. Atkins. I thought you represented the district incredibly well. I know that your staff, who has been working so hard on those programs, was very excited about that presentation. I could go into details about all of it. I have like 2 paragraphs written here. I'm not going to read them all out loud, but I will tell you that you were not the only superintendent to present. You were not the only education leader to present, but you were the only leader that had an actual presentation to give, and you were the only leader who was able to speak with passion and a clear understanding of what we do here in the district in that regard. You know, you spoke from prompts. You didn't read a presentation to that committee, and I thought you did a fantastic job. And the job you did there reflects on the staff that does all of that work on a daily basis. So thank you for doing that and representing the district so well. We approved salary schedule at our last meeting. And Dr. Atkins, can you refresh my recollection what level of administrators decided to forego a raise?
The level of administrators that decided to forego a raise were executive directors, chiefs, and myself.
Right, I was going to say executive directors and up, but I just wanted to make sure I had that right because I didn't remember it exactly. You weren't thanked for that. Your cabinet was not thanked for that. Your executive directors were not thanked for that. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. We are in very uncertain economic times, and the fact that you were willing to put in the unbelievable amount of work and passion that you've put in over the past year to get schools open in a way that the rest of the country was unable to, or many parts of the rest of the country were not able to. You've done it, and you continue to do it, and the challenges continue to come your way, and you continue to show up every day, and you're not even getting a raise now. I mean, you're getting beaten up, but you're not getting a raise. So just know that you're appreciated. From where I sit, I have significant appreciation, not just for your work, but for your willingness to sacrifice and make sure that money is available in the budget for teachers and students and programs and that kind of thing. So thank you. I did have some marathon FHSAA meetings over the weekend, Sunday and Monday. All of our student, I can't even remember what they're called now, student appeals seem to be associated with COVID and, you know, kids losing a year because of COVID. That was most of the day on Sunday. And then yesterday we had an interesting discussion about whether we should pause the reclassification of schools. So that impacts who schools play and what classification they're in for state championships and that sort of thing. We were able to pause that discussion for a couple weeks to gather some feedback from constituents, and we will be meeting again in 2 weeks to make a final decision on that. Dr. Atkins, I'm working directly with Mr. LaRosa on that. I'm also seeking feedback from coaches and athletic directors in the entire southern part of the state. So I am in touch with some of your staff, but it's in my role as FHSAA board member, not in my role as Lee County board member. Finally, I think the last thing I'd like to talk about is COVID at home, meaning in my home. We were quarantined as a family, and thankfully none of us were ever positive. But I got to see firsthand what it's like to have to quarantine with kids who are under the pressures of academics and not being able to be in school, and under the pressures of athletics and not being able to be on the practice field so that they can prepare for their championships, and the various pressures that kids are under. And I lived it. I lived the mental health things that Ms. Fisher so often and frequently talks about that I don't understand, but very grateful for the programs that are in place at the district, because I know that I can call the school if one of my kids is having problems, if they're struggling, if they're showing signs of depression. I know that at a minimum I can call my school and say, hey, this is what's going on, what are the resources, what do I do, where do I go? I will say too that, you know, my daughter has been quarantined 3 times since the school year started. I have a son that's been quarantined twice since the school year started. These are tremendous disruptions in their lives. As, you know, 14-year-old and 17-year-old kids, a 2-week quarantine is the world to them, because it takes them away from their friends, it takes them away from their studies, it takes them away from their midterms, it takes them away from their sports. And they don't have the perspective that we have to say that 2 weeks is not that big a deal. So I want parents to understand that I get it. I get that this is a terrible disruption to our kids' lives, but at the same time, we're in school. Schools are open. And this was a risk that I took as a parent. I remember being on the phone with one of my kids' principals at the beginning of the year saying, well, I think I'm just gonna keep my student at home if you can't guarantee me Lee Home Connect in the event of a quarantine, for example. And the principal said, I'm sorry, we cannot offer you that, but I do believe that in-person is the best place for your child to be. I listened to the principal, and while these quarantines have certainly been disruptive, it's so much better than not having the option to be in school. So I just wanted to share that experience, and I believe those are my comments for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mrs. Giovanelli?
Thank you. I too judge the science fair. This is like my 4th year in a row, and it was different with the virtual aspect of it, but you know, it's right now we are in a pandemic, and we still had a science fair, you know, so that was awesome, and the participation was actually quite a bit. You'd be surprised, and exciting. So I really thank actually Lee Hughes and Gary Nelson, because they both worked very hard with the committee that they have. There's several teachers throughout the district that work very hard on putting this together, and we had some bumps in the road with the actual virtual part of it, but they were able to get it fixed quickly, and for us to continue to judge online. So I encourage any of you next year to be able to get involved. They would love more participation. They always need judges. So I just thought I'd throw that part out there as well. I just want to say that you know, we as a board, we have to be very careful. I was uncomfortable with the conversation. We need to respect each other. And I think that everyone has a viewpoint and a voice at the table, and we should not be stifling anyone's viewpoint. And Ms. Gittens, I respect all your conversations at this table, and I will continue to respect that, as well as anyone else, even when people actually are even doing it negatively. I still respect the fact that they have the right to speak and say what they feel that's important to them, without trying to stop them and stifle them for how they conduct their work and their thought process and their business. Everyone has the right to do it the way they do it. That's what makes it wonderful, of people being unique and different. So I think we need to embrace each other instead of trying to separate everyone out. So I want to thank Ms. Morgan, because she was going to make a comment, and I think she refrained, and I respect that. So thank you about a comment that I had made. So I think it's going to be a you know, baby steps, and but we need to work together, not work separately. Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Morgan?
So I just need to understand, do we talk about only agenda things at night and everything else during the day, or do we no longer do that? Okay. There are things I would like to say tonight, but since they're not on the board agenda, I'll go over everything today.
Ms. Morgan, it depends on what it is, because you are able to speak during good of the order.
Oh, all right. Thank you. So first of all, I would like to mention that Kevin Daly spoke at BUPAC 2 weeks ago, and I went, and boy, oh boy, I went to BUPAC 2 weeks ago to listen to Kevin Daly speak, and I have to say, the audience was initially not receptive, and he turned them around with the way he talks. He is articulate, he is rational, he really impressed them in talking about the union and its role and its relationship with the district. So I just thought that was worth mentioning. I also saw the Adkins presentation to the subcommittee. I won't say anything about it. Chris covered it, but I would say that when I was watching it, I thought that would be a great script to share with chambers as a chamber speech. I want to thank the Imagine Conference for underwriting the series for first responders. I watched retired Marine General John Allen speak about his work as president at Brookings. I've been reading through some of their research on early childhood education, and it's absolutely fascinating the work they do. And I appreciated his comments about significant challenges facing the world over the next couple decades. I was excited to learn that Kids Read Now, a summer reading program for Tier 3 second graders, will take place this summer as the sort of early childhood, I'm going to call myself early learning advocate. I think it's great that we're doing this, and that money comes from Tier 1 dollars, or Title 1 dollars. I'm glad that we can do the Young 5 program. I know Dr. Quisenberry spoke about it at the Parent University. I don't know how that went. I wasn't able to watch, but I hope she was able to generate some excitement, because again, I think we are really committed to getting these kids ready for school, and I will be excited to see the initial data showing the outcome from that program. Also want to mention that Riverdale High School got an award. College Board recognizes schools that are engaging more female students in computer science coursework. And out of 20,000 institutions that offer AP courses, just over 1,000 were recognized, and Riverdale High School won an AP Computer Science Principals Female Diversity Award. And I think that's pretty remarkable, because normally we don't see them in the sciences, mentioned as one of the high schools in the sciences. So I thought that was terrific. Now I want to talk a little bit about the meeting or the workshop yesterday. Because the workshop, having to do with the strategic plan and human resources. But before I make my comments, I want to give the board members some context. When I joined the board in 2012, I was outspoken about the need for a district strategic plan, data-based and goal-driven. It was 3 years before we hired a superintendent who understood the need for an organic strategic plan based on the needs and resources unique to the district. It took us another year to understand district challenges and opportunities, and a third year to articulate a meaningful set of goals and priorities. I've watched the process slowly come together, occasionally disrupted by leadership changes, but relentlessly moving forward. And I should say that, I'm going to interrupt myself. When I was in another school district and a new superintendent came in and he said we were going to do these things, and they were absolutely unbelievable, and 5 years later we turned around and we were a different school district. That's what I've been looking for here since I got on the Lee County School Board. I've watched this process come together, occasionally disrupted. During that time, I've also been encouraging presentations by staff to become more substantive, focusing on whys and hows of their continuous improvement process. As we began the District Strategic Plan review cycle for the 2021 school year, I am increasingly gratified by the presentations. while I understand how much district and school leaders want to share their work with us, I really appreciate the move of content in presentations toward what is important information to us as board members in our capacity as board members. Don't tell us what you do, tell us why you're doing it. Give us the data, tell us what the goal is, tell us what the action plans are, come back and give us accountability and timelines. So that's just by way of saying that. After I saw that HR presentation yesterday, I thought, we're really getting there. The divisions, the interdivision relationships, just the whole format, starting at 30,000 feet, working through the data, coming down to the goals and the action plans. I thought, you know what? We're going to get there. I was just so excited. So I just wanted to share that, but I wanted to give you the context in which I feel really excited by what I see happening. I am going to make a comment this evening about the rabble-rousers in this district, so I'm saving that for tonight. I'm not going to make that this afternoon. I'm going to make one last comment, similar to some others that have been made here. I want to express my disappointment to the briefing meeting chair, who cut off one board member for perceived tone while allowing other board members to badger the superintendent. We have a problem here. It is not fair how we treat one another. It is not nice and it's not fair. And I don't like to see the superintendent badgered, and I don't think staff likes to see him badgered. And I don't think that's what we're here for. I think we're here to support the people who have busted their butts over the last year to keep this organization going and to continue to make improvements despite the challenges. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Okay, Mrs. Gittens?
I have to take a second. Part of me wants to answer and say something, and part of me wants to just get up and take my purse and leave. Badgering the staff, badgering the superintendent. It's been 2.5 years, and verbally and non-verbally, I'm still told to stay in my lane. I can't. I'll make comments tomorrow. Thank you.
Okay, my comments, we had a recent EDAC meeting, 2 guest speakers. One was Dr. Atkins, and he did a great job going through various district initiatives and talking about the strategic plan. Of course, you know, he touched on many of the things that we know well, that we have done, that we've talked about here at the dais, the kindergarten readiness rate, and expanding on pre-K and early childhood education, closing achievement gaps with ELL and ESE, and of course the district growth rate, career pathways. He touched on all of those things, and I have to say that the members of EDAC were very interested in all of it and had some good questions for the superintendent. The second guest speaker that we had was Mr. Brian Mangan, and he spoke on the student code of conduct. And I'm thinking, you know, you're never sure what more would have been in the presentation, but as is the case often with presentations, the EDAC focused in on, it focused in on the various levels of discipline, and we really got into a pretty deep conversation about what should be shared with teachers in terms of, and we're talking about the kind of disciplinary practices would be faced by students who actually had committed felonies outside of the schools, and some pretty heavy-duty things that have gone on. And Mr. Mangan did an excellent job fielding questions, and I believe that EDAC will, in the future, want to take a closer look, because all of this goes to the issue of the pipeline to prison, and what is fair for students. And it was a very good conversation, one that some of you might want to listen to, and we had some split opinions on what should be shared with teachers, what shouldn't. I had an opinion having to do with that, having been through this, what might be important for a teacher to know about his or her students. And there was another teacher in the room, part of the committee, that had a similar view. And then we had some others on the opposite end, and then the people in the middle that were just listening and forming their opinions. So I thought we had a really good meeting, because the presentation sparked a lot of discussion, and I think that's really important. I want to come to the comments made by fellow board members, from Miss Fisher, people being allowed to finish, having a response, the critique that Mrs. Morgan gave to me as a board chair, and of course I'm listening. I am listening, but I'm going to say this, that as a chair here, facilitating, actually directing this meeting, I don't think, and I will have a discussion with Mrs. Dupree-Bruno to make sure that I'm not misunderstanding something in my role. I really don't think that a briefing is the time for talking between board members. And I understand what Ms. Fisher said, because we are in the sunshine. We operate in the sunshine. And when can we have these discussions otherwise? And they're very important to have. However, maybe this communication issue would be better served at a workshop. I personally, to go to this evening's agenda, or this afternoon's agenda, Ms. Patrica did ask for permission, and I nodded, to address Ms. Skittins, but to me, and this is my judgment call, and remember, I am the chair for this, I judged that it was getting very negative. And knowing the personalities of the people on the board, I could see where it was going, and it wasn't going anywhere good. And so I made a judgment call. And some of you may not agree with judgment calls that I make as the chair here. I can say there have been chairs in meetings where I don't agree with the judgment calls and manipulation, because it's pretty easy to manipulate who talks first, second, third, last, etc. So I will have that discussion with Ms. Dupree-Bruno, and if I'm out of line in saying I don't think this is the place to have a back and forth conversation, then I will adjust how I run the meetings. Until then, I stand firm with, and we see it right now, that a cloud came over this whole thing with that conversation. One final note, I did have after, I can't remember if it's a briefing meeting, no, not a briefing meeting. After one of our meetings 2 weeks ago, I had a short discussion with Ms. Dupree-Bruno about the use of a personal device, our phones, or laptops, or whatever, at these meetings, and especially during action meetings. Yeah, I have my school phone, or my district phone right here, and I use it in case I need, or vice versa, the board attorney needs to say, watch the time, or something like that. But you're not going to find me texting. And I would like to revisit, if necessary, how these phones are being used at the dais. I do understand that some of you have children or other family members where an emergency may occur and you need to be aware of that. But I have a pretty strong hunch that the phones are not only being used in that way by some of the people.
Negative.
Excuse me?
I said negative.
Negative what?
Negative attitude towards the rest of the board. You're making
But,
assumptions.
well,
about
thank you for
conduct.
interrupting what I'm saying, Ms. Morgan. I'm just saying that I think it's something that we need to revisit as a board. I thought we had discussed this in the past. There are legitimate uses, but I'm going to request that at a workshop or somewhere that we revisit how the personal devices are used and whether they're being used to influence other board members on particular votes, or getting information from outside people. And those are my comments. Okay, Mrs. Dupree-Bruno, do you have any comments?
I do. First and foremost, Robert's Rules of Order does have some provisions with regards to timing and discussions during debate. The rule says that when there is a motion pending and you're having discussion, there are 2 rounds per member, and the maximum time allowed is 10 minutes. Now, this is for motions. In workshops and briefings, we don't have motions. I would like to have a discussion with the board to see if we can formulate some rules with regards to discussions and put it in your protocol manual so that everyone is on the same page and understands the expectations of each board member. Is that something that we can do? Do I have permission to set that up with the board?
Okay, let's have consensus on that. How many of you feel that we should visit some of these issues and put them in the protocol manual? If you think that...
Specifically with regards to timing.
With timing, the issues that Ms. Dupree-Bruno just mentioned with timing. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. I can't, Ms. Patrica, I can't see your hand.
I can live with it.
Live with it, so it passes with 5, I think, were there 2 people?
Yes.
Sideways, okay. 5 yes, and 2, I can live with it, so that.
Yeah,
Or
we'll see
yes.
somebody.
There's only 6 people left at the table.
Yes.
Oh.
Well, I can live with its or yeses.
Thank you, I appreciate the correction. Yeah, so it passes.
Number 2, the discussion that occurred is a discussion that can be had, but it's more appropriate to have it during good of the order. That's pursuant to Robert's rules. So I would ask board members, when we're going to have those types of discussions, to have them during good of the order. You do have your own workshop that has all of your priorities and your specific topics. That's probably a good time to have these types of discussions. The board has worked very hard over the last several months with regards to its communication with each other at the dais, with regards to how it's operating in its business. Everyone is watching everything that you do, and your words matter. And I will share that I have had staff come to me, and I'm not talking about high-level staff, not directors, not chiefs, not executive directors, that are concerned sometimes by what they see on the dais. It floats down and it definitely affects the morale of the district. So I would ask the board there's nothing wrong with having discourse, deliberations, discussions. There's nothing wrong to disagree. But we gotta find a way to do it where it's not so harsh on each other and not personal against each other. When we have our discussion about time, I'm hoping that some of this will also come out, because I think a lot of it does have to do with time. And we can also discuss some other things within the protocol manual, just as a reminder, as well as a few other Robert's Rules of Order tips that I'm finding that we may need to address. Just a few things, just to touch bases and make sure that we reset and we get back on the same track that the board has been doing. Those are my comments.
Thank you. Superintendent Atkins?
You got a hand up over there.
Can I add that to her recommendation of having a workshop about these things?
I can barely hear it. Can you do that?
Can I add to what she just mentioned about having a workshop or to having a discussion about some of our protocols?
Okay, go ahead.
Because I actually have spoke to her about that. I think we need to reiterate and remind us all that when we receive emails, especially if it's just one person, that when that we share with all board members. There's been emails that has not been that, and or not response, or no response at all. I'm not sure, but when we get emailed something, we need to make sure that it's being shared with all board members as it's forwarded to the superintendent. And that's not happening. So we can add that to that.
Okay. Did anybody else want to add any comments to what Mr. Preverno said? Okay, Dr. Atkins, please.
One of the things that we discussed last time we met, we talked about sending a message out to our leadership team, and I again am grateful that the board joined with us in that message in terms of the message regarding VAM, the message regarding school grading, accountability, and so forth. And I think that did make an impact. However, having said that, and having received some feedback from staff beyond just the principal level, I think there's probably more that we can do. I know that every single board member here is extremely grateful for the work that our teachers are doing every single day, our bus operators are doing every single day. I know every one of you has said that at some point. I would like for us as a governance team to take it literally to another level. I think they want to see people, they want to hear from us, and because so that we really, beyond just the dais, but in other ways, to express our appreciation for the hard work they've done during this pandemic. So with your permission, one of the things that I'm working with our chiefs on is how can we go about recognizing them, and it may be things where, one of the things I'd like to do is go out to a bus compound and just tell them or wave at them, whatever, like at the beginning of the year. Ms. Fisher and I have talked about, going over and just saying, hey, thank you to the maintenance crew, but also there's just, I think we just need to let's make a bigger effort to express our appreciation. So with your permission, I'd like to work with staff and with Lizette and Latanya and maybe schedule some things or make some suggestions. The other thing I want to let you know, the foundation, they have really, they gave really, I think, glowing praise for the work of our teachers and support staff and leaders out in the buildings, and so they want to help as well, which may be just something maybe they can do even financially to help support our schools. So maybe be thinking of some ideas and then forward them to maybe myself and Ms. Jordan as the chair to bring forward to their consideration. So with your permission, I'd like to do that. I think it's important for them to see us as a team. And so I would like to do this as a team, if that's okay.
Okay, so let's indicate our permission. How many of you are on board with Dr. Atkins' recommendation? Okay, unanimous, 6-0.
I appreciate that. We'll
Consensus.
work on a plan and get that to you ASAP. Thank you.
Is that anything else?
That's it.
Okay, is there anything else now for good of the order? Okay. Seeing none, it is 4:16, and we are in adjournment.